Chapter 608. Very good. Huoliao Yuan was so angry that he laughed. Lu Ye's reaction was within his expectations. If the other party was really going to resign himself to death, then he would really look down on Lu Yi. As soon as he finished speaking, he raised his hand and slapped the air in front of him. Spirit energy surged around his body, with his palm as the origin. A fiery red spiritual energy disk with a radius of several tens of meters quickly spread out. Within the disk, complex lines were intertwined with each other, flashing with light. The spirit energy disk seemed to be embedded in Huoliao Yuan's palm, and as he activated his spirit energy, the disk began to glow. As soon as he activated it, fireballs of various sizes appeared out of thin air, dragging bright flames behind them as they shot towards Lu Yi like a meteor shower. As a ninth-order Cloud River Realm cultivator, he studied spirit techniques all year round. Naturally, his attainments in spirit techniques were extremely high. The meteor shower was extraordinary as soon as he made his move. The dense fireballs dragged a red glow behind them. Under Huoliao Yuan's control, they turned into arcs and rushed towards Lu Yi. Wherever they passed, space was burned and distorted. Lu Ye's figure leapt. He dodged the first few fireballs that hit him. Taking advantage of the gaps in the meteor shower, he quickly moved forward. His movements were swift. His reaction was fast. It was far beyond the level of a fifth-order cultivator. The fireballs hit the air one after another. They bombarded the deathmatch arena and the restriction barrier in the surroundings. Dazzling flames bloomed. An astonishing heat wave erupted. The calm Huoliao Yuan revealed a look of surprise. He, a ninth-order cultivator, personally took action against a fifth-order cultivator. In fact, he didn't pay too much attention. In his opinion, the difference in their cultivations was so great that he was afraid that a casual spirit technique would be enough to take Lu Ye's life. Using a spirit technique like the meteor shower was already an extremely safe response. However, Lu Ye's performance surprised him. The other party was actually able to shuttle through his meteor shower. Was this the reaction of a fifth-order cultivator? Huoliao Yuan's expression immediately became serious. It wasn't as if he had never failed miserably at an easy task, and he had warned himself before. His mind power began to surge, and the number of fireballs that surged out from the spirit energy disk in front of him increased, and their trajectories became more and more erratic. Lu Yi was like a fish swimming against the current of the fireballs. When Fire Prairie's mentality changed, he immediately felt the pressure and slowed down his swimming speed. Magic cultivators had a certain degree of control over the techniques they released, and this ability would manifest itself after a cultivator reached the seventh order. Take Lu Yi for example. When he first cultivated the Fire Phoenix technique, his cultivation was only at the third order. The spell was cast. He had no way of controlling the trajectory at all, so his accuracy was extremely poor. However, once a cultivator reached the seventh order realm, they would be able to control spirit chi outside of their body. This was also the fundamental reason why cultivators could control spirit chi outside of their body. Being able to control the spirit chi inside a spirit artifact meant that they could also control techniques. The level of a magic cultivator's attainment was not only dependent on how many techniques they had mastered and how powerful they were, but also on how well they could control their own techniques. Huoliao Yuan was undoubtedly a qualified magic cultivator. Although he couldn't control all of the fireballs that surged out, he could still control a portion of them. However, the trajectory of the fireballs that were controlled by him was extremely difficult to distinguish. Just like now, Lu Yi had clearly dodged some of the fireballs, but they could still return and attack him from behind. Lu Ye's hand, which had been on the hilt of his saber all this time, flashed with a fiery red light as the mountain coiling saber was unsheathed. Under the sharp light of the saber, the incoming fireballs were split apart, creating a series of explosions. Lu Ye's protective spirit chi lingered around his body, and the scattered sparks fell, accelerating the consumption of Lu Ye's spirit chi. He didn't use the power of his talent tree. This was the reason why he was so confident in facing Huoliao Yuan. He didn't want to expose it unless it was absolutely necessary. Moreover, if he wanted to defeat a ninth-order Cloud River Realm cultivator, Relying on the power of his talent tree alone was far from enough. He needed to let Huo Liaoyuan consume as much of his spirit qi as possible. Only then could he kill him in a single blow when he was at his weakest. In terms of cultivation, he was indeed much weaker than Huo Liaoyuan. However, other than this, Huo Liaoyuan had no other advantage. Die! Huo Liaoyuan suddenly let out a roar with a ferocious look on his face. Lu Ye's long blade came to an abrupt halt as he turned to look at the huge fireball in front of him. This fireball was clearly different from the others, and the spirit energy contained within it was extremely violent. Just as he was paying attention to this fireball, a chaotic and violent energy fluctuation came at the same time. The huge fireball suddenly expanded in his field of vision, accompanied by a violent buzzing sound and a scorching light. The fireball exploded, engulfing Lu Ye's figure. Huo Liaoyuan didn't stop, instead taking advantage of the situation to pursue. Under his exquisite control, more fireballs poured into the fireball one after another, triggering the aura of death. The fireball suddenly surged, and Lu Ye's sorry figure fell out of it. His body leaned forward slightly as he spread out his hand in front of him. A huge spirit rune appeared in front of him. At first glance, it looked like he was holding a shield. Although his other hand was badly burned by the flames, he still held onto his mountain coiling saber tightly. His feet were planted on the death arena stage. Under the huge impact, he slid back more than 300 meters before he could stabilize himself. With a crash, the spirit rune shield in front of him shattered, revealing Lu Ye's figure. His clothes were tattered and his body was covered in burn marks. Even his hair was curly and charred. He had tried his best to gradually close the distance between him and Huo Liaoyuan, but his opponent had easily erased all his previous efforts and returned everything to square one. Sure enough, I hate cultivators. Lu Yi turned his head and spat out a mouthful of blood to calm the tumbling blood in his chest. These fellows relied on their strength to do whatever they wanted, making him unable to use his skills at all. Huo Liaoyuan was slightly taken aback. Looking at Lu Yi who had escaped, his expression suddenly became excited. Amazing, amazing! He looked as if he had discovered something new and interesting. His eyes were full of excitement and joy. A trivial fifth-order cultivator was able to block my spirit art. Lu Ye, you really are a monster. No wonder the great forces of Myriad Demon Ridge have such a headache over you. I was thinking that it wouldn't be worth it to just kill you like this. After all, I used a rare treasure like the Death Arena. Since you're so powerful... His expression suddenly became cold, and the words that came out of his mouth were like ice from the 9 nether hells. Then struggle well. No matter what, I've paid so much, so you have to let me see a good show. With another flash of light, the dense fireballs on the spirit energy disk reappeared. After the fireballs appeared, they only paused for a moment before rushing towards Lu Yi. After suffering a loss just now, how could Lu Yi not know that with his current strength, it was simply wishful thinking to rush in front of his opponent in this situation? The physique of a spirit art cultivator was indeed thin. If a weapon cultivator got close to them, most of them wouldn't have a good ending. However, they had long arms. In the face of an absolute gap in strength, it was impossible for a weapon cultivator to get close to them. Sure enough, he had to constantly consume his strength. With such a dense attack, even if Huo Liaoyuan was a 9th-order cultivator, he would definitely consume a lot of energy. After making up his mind, Lu Yi immediately dashed to the side. Fireballs followed closely behind, brushing past his body as they bombarded the death arena stage and collided with the barrier, creating loud rumbling noises. As the fireballs exploded, they swept out in all directions, causing Lu Yi to feel like he was a canoe drifting in the middle of the sea, drifting about in the middle of the raging waves. Huo Liaoyuan was indeed going crazy. His expression was distorted. This might have something to do with the heavy casualties yesterday. More than 60 people had died at once, so the psychological pressure he was under was too great. Now that he had an opportunity, he could finally release it all. While urging his spirit art to attack, he laughed madly and shouted from time to time, "Run, run. Look at you, you're running like a mouse. How ugly is your posture? You want to kill me? If you want to kill me, Then come. You only know how to run, but you won't have the chance to kill me. While ridiculing, he didn't forget to provoke. It could be seen that Huo Liaoyuan's temperament was very meticulous. Even in a situation where he had complete control, he still instinctively used words to influence Lu Ye's mind. Why would Lu Yi pay attention to him? Since he had made up his mind to exhaust Huo Liaoyuan's strength, the longer he delayed, the better. Lu Yi kept running around the death arena. Occasionally, he would pretend to charge over to confuse Huo Liaoyuan. Unsurprisingly, every time he did that, Huo Liaoyuan's attacks would become more ferocious and block him. The mountain pan saber in his hand was almost like a decoration. He didn't have the chance to swing it at all. The defensive spirit inscriptions kept urging, blocking some attacks that he couldn't avoid. None of the fireballs caused direct damage to him, but the impact from the explosions still caused pain all over his body and his qi and blood to tremble. This was also the reason why he didn't urge the talent tree's power immediately. While it was true that urging the talent tree could prevent the fire elemental power from harming him, the accompanying impact and tremors couldn't be avoided. Moreover, urging the talent tree like that consumed a lot of mental strength. Even if Lu Ye's mental strength was much stronger than cultivators of the same level, he couldn't maintain it for long. He had to wait for the right opportunity to use this trump card. Only then would it have an unexpected effect. Time passed. A cup of tea, a stick of incense. Lu Yi was in an increasingly sorry state. Huo Liaoyuan's expression was no longer as relaxed as before. The meteor shower spell consumed a lot of energy. He had never maintained it for such a long time. In just a stick of incense's time, he had used up nearly half of his spirit qi. However, what made him feel helpless was that Lu Ye was still alive and kicking. Chapter 609. This was the awkwardness of a magic art cultivator. Even if the difference in cultivation was huge, if the magic art couldn't hit its target, it would be meaningless. Moreover, judging from Lu Ye's speed and response, Huo Liaoyuan couldn't help but have a strange feeling that he wasn't fighting a fifth-order weapon cultivator. In the Holy Eve Spirit Land, the cultivators of the two sects would often seek him out to exchange pointers, especially an eighth-order weapon cultivator named Mingzhe, who sought him out the most frequently. But when he compared the two, Huo Liaoyuan couldn't help but be surprised to find that Lu Ye's performance was even better than his junior brother Mingzhe's. At the very least, his junior brother Mingzhe had never been able to last so long against him. What kind of monster is this? How can a fifth-order cultivator be comparable to an eighth-order cultivator? Is what I'm seeing all of this? Even if he didn't underestimate Lu Yi from the beginning, Huo Liaoyuan was still a little shocked at this moment. With a thought, the fiery red spirit energy disk in front of him slowly disappeared. Meteor Fire Shower was a dense and violent attack, suitable for one against many, but the consumption was too high. From what he had seen so far, it was unrealistic to rely on this magic art to kill Lu Yi. Huo Liaoyuan could only think of another way. At the same time, Lu Yi, who sensed that his opponent's attack had subsided, immediately tapped his feet on the ground and turned around to pounce at Huo Liaoyuan. Wishful thinking. How could Huo Liaoyuan not know Lu Yi's plan? The other party obviously wanted to take this opportunity to close in on him. With an angry roar, spirit energy surged around his body. The fiery red spirit energy in front of him gathered and wriggled, as if something was about to pounce out. Lu Yi stared at the wriggling spirit energy, and the artifact box at his waist buzzed. 9 imperial artifacts were ready to go. The distance between them quickly closed, but before Lu Yi could activate his imperial artifacts, a hissing sound came from the wriggling spirit energy in front of him. Then a fire snake, several meters long and as thick as a bowl, shot out. If one ignored the flames burning around the fire snake, it looked like a real snake. Its body was smooth, and its scales were fine. Even its eyes and fangs were lifelike. The fire snake pounced out and hissed. In the blink of an eye, it was in front of Lu Yi and opened its mouth to bite. Lu Yi turned and dodged the attack, continuing to attack Fire Prairie. Unexpectedly, the fire snake suddenly twisted its body and whipped its flaming tail towards Lu Yi's back with great force. Lu Yi dodged the attack by a hair's breadth. His body was delayed. He turned around and saw the fire snake chasing after him as if it had a mind of its own. Another hissing sound rang out. The second fire snake slithered its body and attacked. Its speed was so fast that no one could react to it. Lu didn't have time to think too much. He flipped to the side, but the two fire snakes were like living creatures. They attacked him from both sides and entangled him. The Pan Mountain blade swung down, and a sharp blade aura swept out. The long blade landed on the fire snake's body, and a dull sound rang out. It was as if the blade had struck steel. This was clearly a spell formed by gathering spiritual energy, but it was as if it had been endowed with a powerful body and life. Lu sighed in his heart, as expected of a professional spell cultivator. Although he could also use a similar fire dragon spell, he could only control it slightly. He definitely couldn't do it to Fire Prairie's level, which allowed the spell to last for a long time. Summoning these two fire snakes had undoubtedly consumed a lot of Fire Prairie's spiritual energy. He didn't summon a third one. Instead, he stood in place and controlled the two fire snakes to fight with Lu. A large-scale spell like Meteor Fire Rain couldn't do anything to Lu, so he would crush him in his area of expertise. Strictly speaking, these two fire snakes were also fighting Lu in close quarters. The figures of one man and two fire snakes flitted about, and the situation became dangerous. As Lu swung his Pan Mountain blade, sparks flew everywhere from time to time. Fire Prairie's expression gradually turned serious. He realized that although Lu wasn't handling the situation with ease, it was impossible to kill him with just two fire snakes. These two fire snakes could last for a while, but as time passed, the power they could unleash would decrease. He couldn't drag this out any longer. Fire Prairie felt that something was wrong. He had to use the most ferocious method to kill Lu in one blow. When he used the Death Arena, he never thought that Lu, a fifth-order weapon cultivator, would be able to last so long under his attacks. But at this moment, no matter how much he hated Lu, he had to admit that this guy was indeed a difficult opponent to deal with. With this thought in mind, he suddenly opened his arms and shook his body. In an instant, sparks flew out from the sky. At first glance, these sparks looked like fireflies. They were weak and inconspicuous, as if they would be extinguished with a blow. But the moment these sparks appeared, Lu felt a great sense of crisis. The strength of one's mind came with the strength of one's perception. One could perceive many dangers and opportunities that were difficult to see with the naked eye. Lu, who was fighting with the two fire snakes, glanced over at Fire Prairie and saw the sky full of fireflies floating towards him. The fireflies weren't slow, but they covered a large area. No matter what kind of technique it was definitely not something he could contend with right now. Lu immediately rushed towards Fire Prairie, but two fire snakes, one on the left and one on the right, firmly blocked his path, constantly entangling him. In just a moment, the sky full of fireflies covered half of the Death Arena. Some of them even fell on Lu's body, but he didn't feel much. Fire Prairie slowly raised his hand, and the spirit energy around him surged violently. He shouted, "Lu, it's your honor to die under this move of mine." Lu's response was a flash of light. His violent attacks finally broke through a fire snake. His legs were strengthened by wind walk. Just as he was about to run at full speed, he felt a burning sensation wrap around his body. Looking back, he saw that the fire snake that should have been broken by his saber didn't collapse after being cut in half. Instead, it wrapped around his legs like a living creature. Before Lu could break free from the entanglement, another fire snake had already taken advantage of the opportunity to wrap itself around him, tying him up tightly and dragging him to the ground. Lu panicked, but he didn't panic. The fight had greatly weakened the two fire snakes, so he just urged the spirit energy around him and used his arms to break the fire snake, binding him into several pieces. But he was still a step too late. Fire Prairie raised his hand and aimed it at Lu. Then, he clenched his hand as if he was crushing an invisible bug. He said in a cold and deep voice, "Prairie Fire Explosion Burial." A faint fluorescent light suddenly brightened 1,000 times in an instant. At the same time, the light emitted a heart-palpitating spirit energy fluctuation. If it was just a little bit of light, Lu Yi naturally wouldn't care. But at this moment, there were more than a little bit of light floating around him. There were thousands, tens of thousands. There were countless of them. Like a prairie fire, they quickly spread in all directions. All the light exploded, and in an instant, it was as if countless small suns had exploded where Lu Yi was. At this moment, he had just broken free from the fire snake's entanglement. No matter how fast he was, it was impossible for him to escape this area. A loud noise accompanied by a burst of fluorescent light was heard, followed by a series of loud buzzing noises. Dazzling flames enveloped half of the death arena, and the intense heat caused space to distort. The soaring light was blocked by the barrier, and the resulting shockwaves raged back and forth in the huge death arena, causing Fire Prairie's black hair and clothes to flutter. Even the person who used this technique was dazzled by the spectacular scene in front of him. Fire Prairie laughed loudly. Finally, Lu Yi is dead. With such a technique, not to mention Lu Yi, who was just a 5th order, even a 9th order master wouldn't be able to resist. This was one of Fire Prairie's trump cards. In terms of power, it was number 1 among all the techniques he had mastered. The only drawback was that its casting speed was too slow, and it had a lot of limitations. It could only be used when the enemy was restrained. The death arena wasn't big, and Lu Yi was entangled by the fire snake, giving this technique the perfect opportunity to shine. Will Lu Yi die without a complete corpse? If that's the case, then there will be no witnesses. Will the big sects of Myriad Demon Ridge recognize the bounty they issued? Even if Lu Yi didn't die without a complete corpse, he would definitely be burned beyond recognition. Yes, Xia Liang and Tan Xing witnessed me using the death arena. As long as they are willing to stand out and testify, those big sects won't go back on their word. Taking a step back, even if no one testifies, I can swear by the heaven's secret oath to prove that I killed Lu Yi. As he relaxed his mind, all kinds of thoughts suddenly popped into his mind. Fire Prairie Fire's face turned slightly pale as he sat on the ground. Although this battle didn't last long, his consumption was too great. Just the meteor fire shower lasted for the time it took for an incense stick to burn, and nearly half of his spiritual energy was consumed. After that, the fire serpent technique didn't consume too much energy, but the prairie fire explosion burial was another technique that consumed a lot of spiritual energy. At this moment, his spiritual energy was only left with about 20% of his usual spiritual energy. Moreover, his spirit chi was greatly drained, and he already felt a little dizzy. Using a technique didn't just consume spirit chi, it also put a burden on the spirit chi. The more powerful the technique, the greater the burden on the spirit chi. This was one of the drawbacks of being a technique cultivator that couldn't be avoided. However, when he thought about the unimaginable reward for killing Lu Yi, Fire Prairie Fire's mood brightened up again. However, just as the smile appeared on his face, it suddenly froze. No, the deathmatch arena had its own rules. Only one person could leave this place alive, and once one of them died, the restraints of the deathmatch arena would be instantly removed, allowing that person to return to their original position in the deathmatch arena. But why was he still in the deathmatch arena? To be continued. Chapter 610. When this thought appeared, Huoliao Yuan suddenly felt a chill run down his spine. The rules of the death arena were set by heaven's will and could not be wrong. The moment Lu Yi died, he should have been sent out of this space and returned to his original position. But he was still here. Instinctively, he raised his head and looked forward. The soaring flames were still surging, but there was only a remnant force left and it would be completely extinguished in 2 or 3 breaths. Then he saw an unbelievable truth. From the power of the technique that could turn a 9th order Cloud River Realm cultivator into a charred corpse, a figure rushed out. How is this possible? Huoliao Yuan exclaimed. Lu Yi was not dead. How could he not be dead? That was Burning Prairie Exploding Burial, one of his trump cards. This was simply a nightmare. What made Huoliao Yuan even more incredulous was that not only was Lu Yi not dead, he wasn't even seriously injured. Although he looked battered and exhausted, his clothes were tattered and his flesh was exposed in many places, There wasn't a single trace of being burned by the flames on his exposed flesh. The injuries on his body were the same as before. His burning prairie exploding burial seemed to have only scratched an itch for Louis. Such a powerful technique was naturally not just a scratch for Louis. Although he had activated the power of the talent tree at the critical moment to isolate himself from the damage caused by the flames, the impact from the explosions was not something the talent tree could isolate. On the surface, he did not seem to be affected, but in reality his 5 viscera and 6 bowels had been displaced. Blood was flowing in reverse in his throat, but he suppressed it with all his might. Every part of his body was in pain. He rushed out of the flames with boundless murderous intent and charged straight at Huoliao Yuan. After a brief moment of shock and horror, Huoliao Yuan finally reacted. He hurriedly got up from the ground and raised his hand to blast a few techniques at Louis. However, the distance between them was now only 500 feet. This was the closest Louis had been to Huoliao Yuan since they entered the death arena, and he was still closing in. The weapon box at his waist buzzed and 9 streams of light shot out one after another to meet Huoliao Yuan's techniques. Huoliao Yuan had used up a lot of his energy and was mentally exhausted. Although the spell he cast in a hurry was powerful, it was still far from his peak state. A series of explosions erupted as the oncoming spell techniques exploded in unison, sending sparks flying through the air. It was unknown whether Prairie Fire was frightened or if he was trying to gather strength for himself. Every time he shouted, a spell would be unleashed. However, at such a short distance, Lu Yi was able to control his imperial equipment like an extension of his arm. The spells would often explode the moment they were cast. Lu Yi even had the energy to control half of his imperial equipment to attack Fire Prairie. Imperial weapons attacked him one after another, but they were all blocked by Huoliao Yuan's protective spiritual light. They couldn't hurt him at all, but they still made him lose his balance. 300 feet, 20 feet, 10 feet. Lu Yi leaped high into the air and used his imperial equipment to clear the obstacles in front of him. The mountain coiling saber in his hand ignited and his right arm that was holding the saber bulged slightly. Like a hungry wolf pouncing on its prey, Huoliao Yuan, who clearly had a higher cultivation, panicked. Of course, he knew the consequences of letting a weapon cultivator close in on him as a Dharma cultivator, especially one like Lu Yi. Although he was only a 5th-order weapon cultivator, Huoliao Yuan judged that he was not inferior to an 8th-order weapon cultivator. The gap between 1st-order weapon cultivators wasn't as big as he imagined. He had once been approached by his junior brother, Mingzhi, in the Spirit Land, and it took him a lot of effort to get rid of him. At that time, he was in his peak state. In his panic, he stumbled back while not forgetting to cast a spell. It had to be said that his attainments in magic arts were truly impressive. Even in such a situation, casting spells had become an instinct. 3 fire arrows flew out in a triangular formation, but they were all blocked by Lu Ye's imperial equipment. The saber that had been accumulating power for a long time slashed down. The flash. The moment the saber fell, the protective aura around Huoliao Yuan's body burst out with an even more dazzling light. It was obvious that he had used more spirit energy to protect himself. A loud sound rang out as spirit energy surged. Lu Ye's arm went numb while Huoliao Yuan was sent flying. The protective aura around his body hadn't dissipated yet, so Lu Ye's attack didn't take his life. However, the terrifying power contained in the attack was all added to Huoliao Yuan's body. Just like how Lu Ye's talent tree couldn't block the damage caused by the impact, Huoliao Yuan's protective aura couldn't block it either. However, Lu Yi could feel that the protective aura around Huoliao Yuan's body seemed to be elastic when his saber slashed down. This should be able to dissolve part of the force. Lu Yi had heard that there were 2 types of protective aura. One was rigid and the other was elastic. Rigid aura was like a barrier that wouldn't change shape. As long as the barrier didn't break, the cultivator wouldn't be injured. Elastic aura was different. This type of protective aura would cave in and dissolve part of the force. Both types of protective aura had their pros and cons. It depended on the cultivator's choice. However, if one wanted to make their protective aura elastic, they had to have great control over their own spirit energy. Moreover, it required a lot of practice. Not all cultivators could do it. Generally speaking, less than 20% of cultivators at the Cloud River tier could do it. Lu Yi didn't know much about protective aura. Usually, when he encountered an enemy and needed to protect himself, he would activate the defensive spirit tattoo. The defensive power of the defensive spirit tattoo was much stronger than pure protective aura. Huo Liao Yuan's control over his own spirit energy was undoubtedly very good. That was why he was able to unleash such an elastic protective aura. Otherwise, he would have been hit by at least 30% of the force just now. Even so, Huo Liao Yuan still spat out a mouthful of blood in midair. Even if he was a 9th order spirit cultivator, it couldn't change the fact that his physique was thin. Of course, this was only in comparison. He felt as if his bones were about to break when he was hit by such a huge force. His stomach churned and his vision blurred. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw Lu Yi following him like a shadow. He didn't wait for Huo Liao Yuan to land before he slashed down again. This strike caused Huo Liao Yuan's body to sink as he plummeted downwards. At the same time, Lu Yi sent out a kick, causing Huo Liao Yuan to spin and fly 20 to 30 feet before crashing into the barrier of the deathmatch arena. Huo Liao Yuan landed awkwardly and howled in pain. His eyes were filled with fear and panic. If someone had told him before today that he would be beaten like a dog by a 5th order spirit cultivator, he would have snorted disdainfully. But at this moment, he was really experiencing such a ridiculous thing. Everything was clearly under his control. He could have killed Lu Ye to wash away yesterday's humiliation and make up for his mistakes in exchange for a lifetime of endless wealth. How did it turn out like this? Wah! Huo Liao Yuan coughed up blood not far away. He endured the pain all over his body and struggled to stand up. His blurred vision focused and he saw Lu Yi half kneeling on the ground with his long saber in hand. There was a pool of blood in front of him. Huo Liao Yuan's eyes lit up at this scene. He was also injured. He wasn't as majestic as he looked. Huo Liao Yuan didn't realize that he had changed from a master who had complete control of the situation to a person who was worried about personal gains and losses. He was even overjoyed when his opponent coughed up blood and got injured. Lu Yi was feeling very uncomfortable. He had originally planned to kill Huo Liao Yuan in one go, but his excessive actions had aggravated his injuries. He had no choice but to stop chasing. After coughing up blood, he finally felt a little better. Looking up, Huo Liao Yuan was also looking at him with a fierce gaze and surging spirit energy. Without any communication, the two moved almost at the same time. Lu Yi, as usual, used his artifact to clear the path and pounced forward. Huo Liao Yuan, on the other hand, used all kinds of techniques. However, one's aura was very similar to sometimes. Once it was weak and couldn't be hardened no matter what. Even though there was a difference of 4 minor levels between them, many of Huo Liao Yuan's techniques were blocked by Lu Ye's artifact. The distance between them quickly closed again. Huo Liao Yuan's forced calm expression was filled with panic. When Lu Yi was only 10 meters away from him, an irresistible wave of qi accompanied by an explosion of spirit energy swept out in all directions. Lu Yi felt as if a wall had slammed into him and his body was pushed away uncontrollably. Lu Yi didn't know what this technique was called, but almost all the Dharma cultivators he had met had cultivated this technique. Once it was used, they could push everything around them far away. Dharma cultivators were most afraid of enemies getting close to them. This technique was undoubtedly able to save their lives in many cases. If they were in the wilderness, Huo Liao Yuan could have used this opportunity to escape. However, this was a deathmatch arena that he had created himself. It was only 300 meters long and wide. Where could he escape to? Pushing Lu Yi away was just prolonging his last breath. In just 3 short breaths, Lu Yi had closed in on him again. While nimbly dodging a few techniques, he slashed out with his mountain plate saber. Huo Liao Yuan was sent flying again under the huge impact like a ragged sack. The protective spirit light around his body had clearly dimmed by a lot. In midair, he could smell the aura of death. He had once felt this aura when he was in the spirit stream realm. At that time, he was lucky to have a senior brother to protect him and save him from a disaster. He remembered this feeling very clearly. However, he was now alone. The senior brother who had saved him had died many years ago. He knew that when Wuxia broke through his blockade and closed in on him, he had already lost. Time seemed to slow down a lot at that moment. All sorts of chaotic thoughts flashed through his mind. In mid-air, Huoliao Yuan turned his head to look in the direction of the source of the danger. He saw Lu Yi rushing over quickly. The powerful pressure made it hard for him to breathe. To be continued. Chapter 611. He had to do something, or he would definitely die. Huoliao Yuan's strong desire to live made him break through his limits. The remaining spirit energy in his body boiled, and his mind was focused like never before. Pa! Huoliao Yuan suddenly clasped his hands together and opened his fingers. A dot of light suddenly appeared in his palms and quickly expanded, releasing a bright light. Violent and chaotic spirit energy fluctuations were released. Huoliao Yuan seemed to be hugging a small sun between his hands. Traces of spirit energy could be seen flowing on the small sun. At this moment, Lu Yi was only 10 feet away from Huoliao Yuan. Huoliao Yuan's actions alerted him. He had never underestimated his opponent, but he did not stop running because of this. He could cross 10 feet in one breath. At that time, no matter how powerful Huoliao Yuan's spell was, he would be able to kill him with a single slash. Huoliao Yuan's spirit energy was dim at this moment. It was obvious that he was like a lamp that had run out of oil. He poured all of his remaining spirit energy into the small sun in front of him. At this moment, Huoliao Yuan suddenly pushed his hands horizontally, and the small sun in his palms quickly swept towards Lu Yi. As it rushed over, the spirit energy flowing on the surface of the small sun surged faster and faster, peeling off layer by layer like a blooming flower. As the flaming petals bloomed, a terrifying aura instantly filled the entire deathmatch arena. In the blink of an eye, the small sun turned into a huge flaming lotus. Lu Yi had already dodged in advance, but he did not expect such a change. By the time he realized it, he was already wrapped in the flaming lotus. The flaming lotus bloomed silently. It was not as powerful as Huoliao Yuan's exploding burial, nor was it as grand as meteor shower. However, the power it displayed was more terrifying than any of the previous two spells. It was a terrifyingly high temperature that could melt everything. This was Huoliao Yuan's other trump card, a trump card that he had not fully grasped. Normally, when he used this spell, there was a 50% chance of failure. Therefore, Huoliao Yuan never dared to use this spell when facing an enemy, lest he hurt himself instead of the enemy. This time, if he had not been forced into a corner, he would not have dared to take the risk. Fortunately, luck was on his side. Although there was only a 50% chance of success, he still managed to use it. Perhaps it was the effect of extreme concentration brought about by the immense pressure. His face was as pale as paper as he quietly watched the blooming fire lotus. Seeing Lu Ye's figure completely engulfed, he truly breathed a sigh of relief. This time, Lu Ye wouldn't be able to survive, right? Just as this thought popped up in his mind, his pupils suddenly shrank and his eyes trembled violently. Right in front of them, a figure slowly walked out from the blooming fire lotus. His expression was relaxed, and his movements were leisurely. It was as if he wasn't stepping into the vortex of death, but his own backyard. His expression was calm and without the slightest fluctuation. Lu Yi didn't know what Fire Prairie's spell was, but judging from Fire Prairie's performance and his own senses, the spell was indeed terrifying. However, under the protection of the talent tree, he was able to isolate himself from the flames. Comparatively speaking, the damage caused by the fire lotus to Lu Yi was not as great as the prairie fire explosion burial. At the very least, the impact of the burning prairie bursting burial had injured him quite badly. The fire lotus that had silently bloomed in front of him hadn't even burned off a single strand of his hair. Ha! Fire Prairie let out an involuntary exclamation. He couldn't help but take a few steps back, his face full of fear. It was another nightmarish scene. First, it was the prairie fire explosion burial. Now it was the fire lotus. What did Lu Ye do? Why was he able to withstand two of his trump cards and not die? Was he dreaming or what? However, The weakness and pain in his body constantly reminded Fire Prairie that this wasn't a dream. Step by step, Lu Yi slowly moved to within 30 feet of Fire Prairie. The huge fire lotus behind him slowly dissipated. The distorted space from the high temperature also seemed to be gently smoothed out by an invisible hand. Their eyes met. Fire Prairie's dry lips moved as if he wanted to say something. However, in the end, he didn't say anything. He only roared angrily and charged towards Lu Yi. There wasn't a drop of spiritual energy left in his body. As a spell cultivator, without spiritual energy, he didn't even have the ability to use spells. However, he didn't admit defeat, nor did he beg for mercy. This was the deathmatch arena. Only one person could survive. Lu Yi didn't move. With a twist of his wrist, the blade flashed. He gently swung the mountain plate saber and returned it to its sheath. There was a dull thud behind him. Blood flowed out and dyed the floor of the deathmatch arena red. In the spiritual land, the wolf pack and the cultivators of the Holy Eve's spiritual land were separated by a distance of 100 feet. This distance was within the cultivators' attack range. However, the cultivators of the Holy Eve's spiritual land didn't attack the wolf pack. They were facing off against the wolf pack because they were waiting for Fire Prairie. According to the rules of the deathmatch arena, both sides would fight to the death. When one side died, the other side would also be sent back to their original position. Previously, Fire Prairie had activated the deathmatch arena's power in the Return to Heaven spiritual land and lured Lu Yi into the arena. Therefore, he would appear in the Return to Heaven spiritual land. The cultivators of the Holy Eve's spiritual land had to ensure that they could receive Fire Prairie the moment he appeared. They didn't attack, so the wolf pack naturally wouldn't ask for trouble. On the side, Li Baxian's face was so gloomy that it was about to drip blood. He constantly checked Lu Ye's battlefield imprint to confirm whether he was alive or not. When Lu Yi was lured into the deathmatch arena, Li Baxian almost went crazy. He really didn't expect Fire Prairie to have such a rare treasure. His little junior brother was only a 5th-order cultivator. How big was the difference in cultivation between Fire Prairie's 9th order? Although his little junior brother's foundation was strong and he was good at killing enemies above his realm, there was always a limit to everything. Li Baxian didn't think that Lu Yi was Fire Prairie's opponent. If Lu Yi had Hu Po's help to activate his beast transformation secret technique, Li Baxian would have some confidence in him. However, Hu Po had fallen into a deep sleep and Lu Yi couldn't cooperate with him at all. In this battle, his little junior brother was doomed. Li Baxian hated that he couldn't take his place, but even he didn't have the confidence to win against Fire Prairie. The atmosphere in the entire Return to Heaven spiritual land was extremely stifling. Time passed. A cup of tea, a stick of incense, Li Baxian's expression became strange. In his imagination, his little junior brother would only be able to last 100 breaths against Fire Prairie. However, a stick of incense had already passed and his little junior brother was still safe and sound. Li Baxian suddenly realized that he might have underestimated his little junior brother. Or maybe Hu Po had suddenly awakened. If that was the case, then as long as his little junior brother could activate his beast transformation secret technique, it would be hard to say who would die in this battle. As time continued to pass, Li Baxian became more and more certain that Hu Po had awakened at this critical moment. It was even possible that his little junior brother had awakened him. His original anxiety and uneasiness were swept away. Li Baxian quietly waited for Lu Ye's return. He believed that his little junior brother could defeat Fire Prairie as long as he could activate his beast transformation secret technique. On the opposite side, the cultivators of Holy Eve's spiritual land looked very relaxed. In their opinion, Fire Prairie's cultivation was 4 minor realms higher than Lu Yi's, so how could he lose? The longer the battle dragged on, the more likely it was that their senior brother Hua was toying with Lu Yi. At this moment, Lu Yi must be suffering a fate worse than death. What they needed to do was very simple. They just needed to hurry over when Fire Prairie returned. What is Fire Prairie doing? Somewhere in the crowd, Xia Liang softly muttered. Although it was a pity that he couldn't personally kill Lu Yi, since Fire Prairie had said that they were willing to give him 20% of the reward, they would definitely fulfill their promise. However, This guy's efficiency was too slow. He had been in there for so long, yet he still hadn't come out. Didn't he know that a long delay would only bring more trouble? Let's wait a little longer. Maybe he will come out soon. Tan Sheng advised. Xia Liang nodded slightly and raised his eyes to look ahead. He said in a low voice, "Brother Tan, I need you to lend me a hand." "Please speak, Brother Xia." Xia Liang said, "I want to kill Li Baxin." His initial goal was to kill Li Baxin. Yan Xing had died in Li Baxin's hands, so he had to avenge Yan Xing. When he targeted Lu Yi in the hunting ground, his biggest goal was to lure Li Baxin out. In the end, he implicated the Wild Blade sect and caused them to pay a large amount of resources. This was also the cause of his enmity with Lu Yi. Although there were many twists and turns in the process, he still hadn't forgotten his original goal. In comparison, he wanted to kill Li Baxin more. Now that Lu Yi was destined to die in the hands of Fire Prairie, he only had one goal left. Tan Xing naturally knew Xia Liang's obsession with Li Baxin, so he nodded and said, "I will cooperate with Brother Xia when the time comes." Xia Liang said, "Many thanks. If this matter succeeds, if this Xia needs help in the future, don't hesitate to call me." Tan Xing's eyes lit up. Although his strength wasn't much worse than Xia Liang's, there was still a gap between their sects. The Wild Blade sect was first grade, while the New Moon sect he was in was third grade. Getting such a promise from Xia Liang wouldn't be a bad thing in the future. Sometimes, things like favors were very precious. "Brother Xia, you are too polite. I'm coming out," Tan Sheng suddenly whispered. At the same time, everyone noticed something strange. Because a dot of light suddenly bloomed in midair, and then the light revealed the shadow of the death arena. A white light shot out from the death arena and landed in a certain position. The space in that position suddenly distorted, and then a figure appeared out of thin air. The cultivators of the Holy Eve spiritual land who were ready to rush over to help seemed to have been hit by a lightning talisman. They all froze in place, their eyes trembling and filled with disbelief. In the crowd, Tan Sheng's eyelids twitched wildly, and Xia Liang exclaimed, "How is this possible?" It was as if he had seen something extremely inconceivable. To be continued. Chapter 6:12. In the Return to Heaven spiritual land, the shadow of the death arena appeared. Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, a figure appeared. However, what shocked the cultivators of the Holy Eve spiritual land was that the one who returned was not Senior Brother Hua whom they had been longing for, but Lu Qie. No, Hu Liaoyuan had also returned. However, at this moment, he was like a dead dog in Lu Ye's hand. A huge hole was clearly visible in his chest, and blood was flowing out with a dripping sound. There was no sign of life on his body, so he was obviously just a corpse. Many Holy Eve Spirit Land cultivators felt their scalps go numb as a chill swept through their bodies. Senior Brother Hua, who was killed? How could Senior Brother Hua, who was a Cloud River Realm 9th Order cultivator, be killed? Although they didn't want to believe their eyes, the truth was right in front of them. They had no choice but to believe it. On the other hand, Li Baxin finally breathed a sigh of relief after Lu Yi appeared. Just now, he felt that his little junior brother might not lose, but it was definitely just a kind of hope, a kind of prayer. Li Baxin was completely relieved when Lu Yi appeared in front of him intact. But then he was puzzled again. In his imagination, Lu Yi should have awakened the sleeping Hu Po and cooperated with Hu Po to have the capital to fight against Hu Liaoyuan. But now, Hu Po was still nowhere to be seen. Obviously, he was still sleeping in the spirit beast bag. In other words, little junior brother was able to kill Hu Liaoyuan with his own strength? Killing an enemy 4 realms above him? Even if the truth was right in front of him, Li Baxin was still shocked. Since ancient times, such a thing had never happened before. The so-called killing of an enemy above one's realm was generally only 1 or 2 realms higher. It was extremely rare to be able to kill an enemy 3 realms higher, let alone 4. Just as many thoughts were surging in his mind, Lu Yi suddenly raised his hand and threw the corpse in his hand away. A few Holy Eve Spirit Land disciples hurriedly caught it. Retreat! Frightened voices sounded. The Holy Eve Spirit Land cultivators woke up from a dream and hurriedly retreated. Xia Liang and Tan Xing were mixed in the crowd. Even after they left the range of the spirit land, they still couldn't hide the shock on their faces. The wolves didn't chase because it was meaningless. After the Holy Eve's spirit land cultivators left returning Heaven Valley, Lu Yi activated the power of the concealment array. Ripples spread out, and the entire spirit land was covered by the array. His body could not help but stagger as blood flowed out from the corner of his mouth. "Little junior brother." Li Baxian hurriedly stepped forward to support him. Feng Yuechan hurriedly took out a healing pill and stuffed it into Lu Ye's mouth. After swallowing the spirit pill, Lu Yi waved his hand and said, "It's nothing serious. I need to recuperate for a while. The other party probably won't dare to act rashly for the time being. As for the spiritual land, senior brother and senior sister Feng, please take care of it." Li Baxian nodded. "Don't worry, I'll inform you immediately if anything happens." Lu Yi turned around and walked into his wooden house. He sat down cross-legged and silently operated his Xian Qi to recover. His injuries from the battle with Fire Prairie weren't serious, but they weren't light either. They were mainly internal injuries. Fortunately, his physique was strong enough, so it shouldn't be difficult for him to recover. Watching Lu Yi enter the room, Li Baxian's expression was indescribably complicated. Feng Yuechan vaguely sensed something and asked, "What is senior brother thinking about?" Li Baxian smiled. "I'm thinking about the first time I met little junior brother. At that time, their little junior brother had been trapped on top of the golden light and Wei Yang had been the first to arrive, followed by Lu Yi. With the strength of the two of them, they had protected him. Although they had never met before, just based on their identities as disciples of Blue Blood sect, they had already regarded Lu Yi as family. That battle could be considered the battle that made Lu Yi famous. Since then, Lu Yi of the Blue Blood sect was unstoppable and made a name for himself on the Spirit Stream battlefield. Thinking back, it had only been 2 or 3 years. Little junior brother, who needed the protection of his senior brother and senior sister, had actually grown to such a height. Li Baxian could not help but feel that his own child had grown up. At the entrance of returning Sky Valley, the cultivators of the Holy Eve's spiritual land had sorrowful expressions. The atmosphere was stifling. Even now, they had not recovered from the grievous news of Fire Prairie's death. A cultivator's path of cultivation was full of ups and downs. Life and death were normal. It was not that these people had not experienced life and death. On the contrary, each of them had experienced a lot of it. If Fire Prairie was killed by a 9th order cultivator, it would not be a big deal. There was still a difference in strength between 9th order cultivators. If he was killed, it could only be said that his cultivation was inferior and his skills were inferior. But Fire Prairie died at the hands of Lu Yi. Even now, they could not understand how the powerful senior brother Hua was killed by Lu Yi. What happened in the death arena? But they had no way of knowing the details. After all, only Lu Yi and Fire Prairie were in the death arena. Only they knew the whole story of the battle. Among the cultivators of the Holy Eve's spiritual land who came this time, Fire Prairie was the only 9th order cultivator, but there were several 8th order cultivators. One of them was Mingzhi. Although he was from the Huanyu sect, because he and Huo Liaoyuan had similar temperaments, they would often find Huo Liaoyuan to spar. Huo Liaoyuan had never declined, so the two of them had a very good relationship. At this moment, Mingzhi was holding back his grief and examining Fire Prairie's corpse. Although Fire Prairie was dead, there were many marks on his body that might provide some clues that would allow Mingzhi to speculate about the situation of the battle. The fatal wound was on his chest. Fire Prairie's heart was directly crushed. There were many wounds on his body, but they were not caused by sharp weapons. They seemed to be bruises caused by a huge impact. After examining for a long time, Mingzhi could not find any useful clues. But judging from the injuries, Fire Prairie seemed to have engaged in a life and death battle with Lu Yi. In the end, Fire Prairie was defeated and killed by Lu Yi. But was this possible? With a difference of 4 minor realms, what qualifications did Lu Yi have to fight with Fire Prairie? Just as Mingzhi was feeling puzzled, he suddenly received a message from the battlefield mark. He quickly checked it and found that it was a message from Tu Guanxiong. It was a simple question: what happened? He had obviously received news of Fire Prairie's death. Mingzhi held back his grief and recounted everything that had happened in the past 2 days. When he heard that they had lost more than 60 people in the first battle, Tu Guanxiong was speechless for a long time. When Fire Prairie led his men out of the Holy Eve's spiritual land, Tu Guanxiong tried his best to get him to bring more men. A total of 70% of the spiritual land's forces were mobilized. In addition to the Sacred Fire Sect disciples that Fire Prairie had gathered, they had lost more than 60 of their 150 people. This was truly unbelievable. Mingzhi then heard that Fire Prairie had used the Death Arena to lure Luya into the space of the Death Arena. But in the end, the one who came out alive was Luya, and Fire Prairie was the one who became a corpse. Do you know how Brother Fire was killed? A knife through his heart. I don't know anything else. Tu Guanxiong was silent for a moment. It seems like Luya has some powerful treasure. This was the only possibility that could explain Fire Prairie's tragic death at the hands of Luya. He did not think that Luya could have killed Fire Prairie with his own abilities given the huge difference in their cultivation levels. Senior Brother Tu, what do we do now? Mingzhi did not know what to do and felt that his mind was in a mess. It was unrealistic to attack by force. The other party had a pack of wolves. If they dared to step into the area covered by the sky ceiling formation, they would definitely not be able to return. However, they were unwilling to retreat just like that. So many people had died. If they did not take revenge, how could they return to the spiritual land? Continuing to wait for reinforcements here was an option. Previously, Tu Guanxiong had already gathered more Huanyu sect disciples to rush here. However, it would take time. Even if they managed to wait, they might not be able to do anything. They had suffered too many casualties and had lost almost half of their men. The number of cultivators that Tu Guanxiong could gather was also limited. What about Xia Liang from the Mad Blade sect and Tan Xing from the New Moon sect? Tu Guanxiong asked. When they were talking about what had happened in the past 2 days, Mingzhi also briefly mentioned Xia Liang and Tan Xing. They are still here. Mingzhi replied, it seems that they are not willing to leave just like that. Perhaps we can borrow their strength? Tu Guanxiong immediately rejected. One of them is from a first-grade sect while the other is from a third-grade sect. They are not people that we can provoke now. If we dare to borrow their strength, we will definitely be used by them. When they kill Luya, all the benefits will be theirs. Senior Brother Hua mentioned to me before that the information about Luya should be from the two of them. Are you sure? Senior Brother Hua can basically confirm this. Just as Senior Brother Hua predicted, these two people have suffered losses before. They know that they can't take down Luya with their strength, so they want to borrow his strength. Damn it. They actually caused such a huge loss to our Holy Eve's spiritual land. Tu Guanxiong was furious. The Holy Eve's spiritual land was originally safe and sound. However, when they suddenly received news about Luya, things got out of hand and developed to the current situation. Then, Senior Brother, what should we do now? Mingzhi asked again. Tu Guanxiong did not respond for a long time. After a full incense stick worth of time, he replied, I will spread the news about Luya. When the time comes, there will definitely be many people coming to kill him. You guys act according to the situation. With the current strength of the Holy Eve's spiritual land, there was no way they could avenge Fire Prairie and his dead brothers. Tu Guanxiong was furious at Xia Liang and Tan Xing's crafty schemes, so he would not borrow their strength. Even if he did, it might not be enough. Returning Sky Spirit Land was covered by a space-restricting array. Once cultivators broke in, the first thing they would have to face was a pack of wolves. In such a situation, 2 Ninth Order Cloud River Realm cultivators could only play a limited role. Since that was the case, they would spread the news. Now, in Myriad Demon's Ridge, there were countless cultivators who wanted to find traces of Luya. Once this news spread, countless cultivators would definitely swarm in. Luya would die even if he did not want to. Although this way, the Holy Eve's spiritual land would not be able to monopolize the bounty on Luya, this was the only way Tu Guanxiong could think of. At that time, No matter who killed Lu Ye, it would be considered as revenge for the tragic deaths of Fire Prairie and Holy Eve's spiritual land. Chapter 613. At the entrance of returning Sky Valley, Xia Liang and Tan Xing were also discussing the cause of Huo Liao Yuan's death. Similar to Tu Guanxiong, the two of them did not think that Lu Yi could have killed Huo Liao Yuan with his own strength. With the difference in cultivation, no matter how strong Lu Ye's foundation was, he could not have done something so unbelievable. What's more, the two of them more or less understood Lu Ye's strength. Although Lu Ye's cultivation had increased by 2 minor realms compared to when they were in the hunting ground, he was still only a 5th order. Huo Liao Yuan has a rare treasure like the Death Arena, so Lu Yi might have other rare treasures. Huo Liao Yuan died in shame. Tan Xing sighed with some lingering fear. He was stronger than Huo Liao Yuan, but there was a limit to it. If Lu Yi had the ability to kill Huo Liao Yuan, it meant that he had the ability to kill him. However, rare treasures were hard to come by and were basically one-time consumables. Since Lu Yi used it on Huo Liao Yuan, it was equivalent to Huo Liao Yuan stepping into a hole for them. Otherwise, he or Xia Liang might have died. In a way, the two of them had to thank Huo Liao Yuan. Huo Liao Yuan's death is not to be regretted, but Xia Liang turned to look at the cultivators of the Holy Eve's spiritual land and saw that there seemed to be an invisible cloud over there. All the cultivators of the Holy Eve's spiritual land were in low spirits. They wanted to borrow the power of the Holy Eve's spiritual land to break the various arrangements in Lu Ye's spiritual land, but things did not go as they wished. The Holy Eve's spiritual land had suffered huge losses, while Lu Ye's side had only lost a few spirit arrays and a few monster wolves. Their losses were almost negligible. They could not help but feel frustrated. Huo Liao Yuan was too useless. They are leaving? Tan Xing suddenly noticed something strange. The cultivators of the Holy Eve's spiritual land seemed to be retreating. Xia Liang frowned and could not help but step forward to stop Mingzhi. "Junior brother, where are you going?" Mingzhi looked up at him with burning anger in his eyes. It was these two who killed his senior brother Hua and so many of his junior brothers and sisters. Fortunately, he also knew that he couldn't afford to offend these two people, so he suppressed his anger and said indifferently, "Naturally, we're leaving this place." They didn't want to leave, but if they continued to stay here, they might be ambushed again at night. A few of them had already died last night, and that was under the premise that Huo Liao Yuan was present. Now that Huo Liao Yuan was dead, how could they dare to stay? As an 8th Order Cloud River Realm cultivator, Tu Guanxiong had told him to act according to the circumstances, so he naturally had his own judgment and knew that this was a dangerous place. Xia Liang frowned. "You're leaving just like that?" Mingzhi's eyes were bloodshot. He gritted his teeth and said, "Senior Martial Brother Xia, what advice do you have?" Xia Liang said, "Of course, we have to avenge our grievances. If the people of the Holy Eve's spiritual land were to leave, then what was the point of playing?" Mingzhi took a look and then looked at Tan Xing. "Senior brothers, please teach me how to take revenge." How to take revenge? Could it be that the two senior martial brothers are leading us, the remnants of the defeated army, to charge and kill? If the two senior brothers are willing to take the lead, everyone in the Holy Eve's spiritual land will listen to your orders. Xia Liang was speechless for a moment. Although there were many remnants of the defeated army, if they really wanted to attack Lu Ye's spiritual land, it was still not enough, unless they had a way to deal with the wolf pack first. Mingzhi hated the information sent by these two, and even more hated their attitude of wanting to take advantage of the situation. He didn't say anything else and just cupped his fists slightly. He then led the cultivators of the Holy Eve's spiritual land onto the spirit ship. A moment later, the spirit ship took off and flew away. 2 days ago, more than 150 of them came in a mighty manner. In just 2 days, the leader, Huo Liao Yuan, was dead, and only half of the 150 of them survived. The experience of these 2 days was like a nightmare for everyone. The group withdrew from Taimang Mountain and stopped at the edge of the mountain. Tu Guanxiong wanted to spread the news of Lu Ye's location. It could be foreseen that it wouldn't be long before Taimang Mountain became lively. Although these people didn't have the ability to take revenge on their own, they still wanted to see Lu Ye killed with their own eyes. Only then could they vent the hatred in their hearts. The cultivators of the Holy Eve's spiritual land retreated under Mingzhi's lead, but Xia Liang and Tan Xing didn't leave. They stood at the entrance of Huitian Valley and looked in the direction of the spiritual land. The two of them were silent. After a long time, Tan Xing said, "Brother Xia, what are your plans?" Xia Liang said, "I'm considering if we should completely expose the news of Lu Ye." Tan Xing said, "He has the Tianji pillar. If he senses that something is wrong, he will definitely escape back to the 9 states. So even if we do this, we can't really do anything to him. At most, we will just destroy one of his spiritual land." Of course I know. But even if we can't do anything to him, we can't just leave him be. He still has to cultivate in the Cloudy River battlefield. If we destroy his spiritual land today, we will have the chance to kill him next time. If we don't do anything, we will never have the chance to kill him. Moreover, Huliayan has the death arena. Maybe others have it too. It's not impossible to kill him. Although he knew that the possibility was not high, Tan Xing still agreed, "That's true." The reason why they only revealed the news of Lu Ye to the Holy Eve's spiritual land was because they were afraid that they would push too far. If they really did that, Lu Ye would escape back to the 9 states with the help of the Tianji pillar. Then all their plans would be useless. If they only let the people of the Holy Eve's spiritual land attack, Lu Ye would not be so desperate. They would only have the chance to take advantage of the situation when both sides were injured. In the end, the people of the Holy Eve's spiritual land were too useless. In just 2 days, they were beaten to a pulp. Even Huo Yuan, who led the team, was killed. In the current situation, it was not possible to kill Lu Ye. They could only force him to give up the spiritual land and find a better opportunity in the future. After making up his mind, Xia Liang was about to send a message when Tan Xing received it first. After checking and communicating with the other party, he said in surprise, "Brother Xia, someone is 1 step ahead of us." What? Xia Liang didn't understand. Someone has already leaked Lu Ye's location. The message that Tan Xing received was from a junior brother in the sect, informing him of Lu Ye's current location. This junior brother couldn't have known this for no reason. After asking, he found out that many people already knew about this. It's the work of the Holy Eve's spiritual land. Xia Liang immediately reacted. Now, only the two of them and the people of the Holy Eve's spiritual land knew about Lu Ye's location. Just as they made up their minds, someone else had already taken action. Other than the Holy Eve's spiritual land, there was no one else. Xia Liang didn't know who was in charge of the Holy Eve's spiritual land, but he could understand the original intention of the other party. In any case, it saved him some trouble. Taimeng Mountain is going to be lively. Xia Liang sighed. "Let's go." Tan Xing was stunned. "Brother Xia, you're not staying?" Xia Liang said, "Why should I stay? To see how Lu Ye will escape back to the 9 states? Tan Xing thought about it and agreed. According to the current development of the situation, Lu Ye would be in a desperate situation soon. When that time came, he would definitely use the Tianji pillar to escape back to the 9 states, leaving all the cultivators here in vain. There was no point in staying. What they needed to do now was to wait for the next time Lu Ye entered the Cloudy River battlefield, secretly investigate, and find an opportunity to kill him. In the spiritual land, Lu Ye was silently healing his injuries. The benefits of a strong physique were revealed at this moment. If an ordinary cultivator suffered such injuries, they would need at least 10 days to half a month to recover. However, Lu Ye was almost fully recovered in just 1 or 2 days. At the same time, with 2 Guanxiong adding fuel to the fire, the news of Lu Ye hiding in the Huitian Valley of Taimeng Mountain spread like wildfire. Ever since the hunting ground incident, the major sects of the Wanmo Ridge increased the bounty on him. This also stimulated the nerves of countless cultivators of the Wanmo Ridge. During this period of time, countless people were secretly paying attention to his whereabouts. Unfortunately, no one expected him to hide in the depths of Taimeng Mountain. Moreover, he was shrouded in a large formation. Even if there were cultivators passing by, they wouldn't be able to detect the situation of the spiritual land. Only Xia Liang, Tan Sheng and the others, with the help of special treasures, could barely find the approximate location. In the end, one died and two were injured, and they had to escape in a sorry state. Now that the news suddenly spread, those cultivators who were searching for Luya's whereabouts were like cats that smelled blood. They rushed in the direction of Taimeng Mountain from all directions. In an instant, undercurrents surged in the cloudy river battlefield. 2 days after killing Huolian, Lu Ye's injuries were healed. In the wooden house, the 4 people of the spiritual land sat upright. Li Baxian said, "The people of the Holy Eve's spiritual land should have retreated. We haven't seen them in these 2 days. Junior brother Giant Armor let the demon wolf search around before, but we didn't see anyone. Even Xia Liang and Tan Sheng are gone." As expected, Lu Ye nodded. The Holy Eve's spiritual land had suffered such a huge loss this time, and they also had to be on guard against Lu Ye's attacks. Naturally, they couldn't stay here and wait for death. As for Xia Liang and Tan Sheng, the people of the Holy Eve's spiritual land had left. There was no point for them to stay here alone. But senior brother, there's a high chance that we won't be able to keep the spiritual land. First, Xia Liang and the others came together. Now, even the people of the Holy Eve's spiritual land knew about it. The location of the spiritual land was completely exposed. The more time passed, the more people would know about it. Lu Ye found that he had no fate with the spiritual land. When he first entered the cloudy river battlefield, his luck was off the charts. He picked up a grade C spiritual land. In the end, he entered the secret realm of the realm of beasts with Shin Xiaotong. The spiritual land was destroyed, and the spring spirit was stolen. In the hunting ground, he finally obtained the reward of being first on the hunting list and a grade A spring spirit. He deliberately placed the spiritual land in the depths of Taimeng Mountain and had the protection of the wolf pack. But he didn't expect that not long after, something like this would happen again. Lu Ye sometimes wondered if the so-called blessing of the heavens really existed. If it existed, why was he so unlucky sometimes? But there were other times when he did feel that he was blessed with luck. Take what happened in the Fox Immortal Valley for example. The fox demon had been domineering in the Fox Immortal Valley for nearly 20 years, but she met someone like him who could restrain her ability. In the end, he killed the fox demon and saved many people. He was even rewarded by the heavens, and his foundation increased greatly. The matter of luck was really puzzling. To be continued. Chapter 6:14. Li Baxian had also expected that they would not be able to keep the spiritual land. This was the norm on the cloudy river battlefield. Many spiritual lands had changed owners several times. Only those large spiritual lands with more people could maintain a transcendent position on the cloudy river battlefield and be passed down from generation to generation. "What does junior brother plan to do?" he asked. "2 paths." Lu Yi raised 2 fingers. "Now, we will take back the spring spirit and return to the 9 regions. After returning to the 9 regions from the cloudy river battlefield, we will have to wait a month before we can enter the cloudy river battlefield again. The earlier we leave, the earlier we can enter." Li Baxian laughed. Lu Ye's words gave people the feeling of dying early and reincarnating early. Or we cannot return to the 9 regions and start moving now to a more secluded place. But no matter what, the spiritual land we will obtain will only be a B-grade spiritual land. Every time the spring spirit was taken back, it would drop by a grade. Although there was only a grade difference between A grade and B grade, the concentration of spiritual energy in the spiritual land was completely different. What about the second path? Wait and see. Perhaps the situation is not as bad as I thought. Even if we have to return to the 9 regions, we have the Tianji pillar and can retreat at any time. Li Baxian nodded slightly. It was as he thought. In the current situation, they indeed only had 2 choices. Leave immediately or wait until the situation worsened to a certain extent. No matter what, they would not be able to keep this spiritual land. In the end, it was still a pity. The A-grade spiritual land was extremely rare. They had only cultivated here for a few months and had stayed in Fox Immortal Valley for more than a month. Then let's wait. Perhaps, as Junior Brother said, the situation is not that bad? Li Baxian said. Then let's wait. With the Tianji pillar, they could leave at any time. Their safety was still guaranteed. The two set the tone with a few words. Feng Yuechan and Giant Armor did not speak. When Li Baxian spoke, Feng Yuechan only listened quietly and never interrupted him. As for Giant Armor, this guy was a taciturn person and rarely spoke. But before that, Lu Yi looked at Giant Armor. The wolf pack has to leave first. The few of them could use the Pillar of Heavenly Fate to return to the 9 prefectures, but the wolf pack couldn't. Once the situation worsened to the point of no return and they left, the wolf pack would definitely become the target to vent their anger. At that time, the wolf pack would be doomed. Although leaving the wolf pack behind could ensure the protection of the spiritual land, if the cultivators from the Myriad Devil's Ridge were to really take action, they would definitely come with an absolute crushing force. The wolf pack could withstand the attack of the cultivators from the Holy Eve's spiritual land, but they definitely could not withstand the danger that they might face next. I'll leave this matter to you. Get the wolves out of here within 3 days. Giant Shell answered in a muffled voice, Okay. After a brief discussion, the 4 of them dispersed and went about their own business. Lu Yi did not need to worry about how Giant Armor would make the wolf pack leave first. The reason why the wolf pack stayed in the spiritual land was because of Giant Armor. Moreover, the alpha wolf had extremely high intelligence. After the previous battle, the alpha wolf had obviously realized some things. As long as it was not too stupid, it would know that leaving this place early was the only way to protect the pack. Lu Yi began to refine a large number of array flags. Previously, when the cultivators from the Holy Eve's spiritual land attacked the spiritual land, many of the array formations were destroyed. Naturally, they needed to be replenished. Now that his strength and foundation had greatly increased, the speed at which he refined array flags was also much faster. After consuming a lot of resources, array flags were freshly produced. After rearranging the damaged array, he added more array formations to the spiritual land. Under the lead of the alpha wolf, the wolf pack left. However, they did not go too far, only staying at a position 200 to 300 miles deeper into the Taimang Mountains. Obviously, they were ready to return to the spiritual land at any time. Time flew by. A few days later, in the sky above the spiritual land, Lu Ye's figure shuttled back and forth, checking the many array formations that he had set up. With so many array formations, it should be enough. Although he had told Li Baxian that they only had 2 ways out, there was actually another way. However, he did not intend to tell Li Baxian about it. It was not that he wanted to hide it, but if he said it, Li Baxian would definitely not agree. However, if this method could be successfully implemented, then the spiritual land could be saved. At that time, Li Baxian, Feng Yuechan, and Giant Armor could cultivate here in peace. It was indeed a pity to abandon or drop a grade of a spiritual land. The large number of array formations that Lu Yi had set up now was not to deal with the invading enemies. If the situation was really as bad as he had guessed, then it would be meaningless no matter how many array formations he set up in the spiritual land. He left these array formations behind only to increase the defensive capabilities of the spiritual land. After a round of inspection, there were many layers of array formations in the spiritual land. The protection was impregnable. Suddenly, a message came from the battlefield imprint. Lu Yi lowered his head to check it. The message came from someone he did not expect. Shin Kitten. Lu Yi did not know what this woman's real name was, but the name Shin Kitten sounded fake, just like his Yi Lu. However, ever since they lost the Grade C spiritual land, Lu Yi and Shin Kitten parted ways. The latter went somewhere unknown, and they had never contacted each other these days. He did not expect that she would actually send him a message, and the content of the message surprised Lu Yi. Run, a lot of people are heading towards you, a lot. A lot. It was a simple sentence, but she used a lot. Obviously, it was a lot. From this, it could be seen that the location of the spiritual land was completely exposed. At this moment, There should be a large number of myriad Devil Ridge cultivators rushing over here. It could even be said that there were already people lurking nearby. For Shun Kitten to send him such a message at this time, the amount of information contained was not small. First of all, how did Shun Kitten know that a lot of people were coming this way? The exposure of the spiritual land's location must only be circulated within the myriad Devil Ridge camp. It was impossible for the cultivators of the Grand Heaven Alliance to know. Even Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan did not receive any warning. The two of them had a much wider network than Lu Yi. If the cultivators of the Grand Heaven Alliance camp knew this news, they would definitely send a message to warn the two of them. But the current situation was that Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan did not receive any news. Instead, it was Shen Kitten who sent a warning to Lu Yi. The fact that Shen Kitten knew this in itself explained a lot of things. Shen Kitten must have known that Yi Lu was Lu Ye of the Jade Blood sect long ago. After all, Lu Ye's image was spread everywhere in the myriad Devil Ridge. Many cultivators had seen his image. Lu Yi did not know why Shen Kitten sent him such a message, but he could feel that the other party had good intentions. Perhaps it was because they had cultivated in the same spiritual land, or because they had lived and died together in the secret realm of the realm of beasts, or even because she had followed Lu Yi to sell things in the Tianji treasure house and obtained great benefits. Anyway, no matter what, to send this message at this time showed that this girl's heart was not bad. When Lu Yi first stepped into the cultivation world, he thought that the people of the Myriad Devil Ridge were all heinous people. He even thought that the Grand Heaven Alliance represented good and the Myriad Devil Ridge represented evil. But as he continued to understand the situation of the cultivation world of the 9 regions, he found that there was no such thing as good or evil in this world. There were only 2 opposing camps. He simply replied, "Got it. Thank you." Shen Kitten did not say anything else. Sending a message to Lu Yi as soon as she received the news was already the limit of what she could do. If she revealed more information, it would only make her conscience suffer. Speaking of which, the sect behind her had also been blackmailed by Lu, even though Lu Yi did not know which sect she came from. Returning to his wooden house, Lu Yi fell into deep thought. Things were still developing in a bad direction. There was nothing he could do. 9 out of 10 things did not go his way. Suddenly, a strange feeling came. Lu Yi quickly opened the spirit beast bag. A snow-white figure immediately rushed out of it, shaking its head. It was Hu Po, who had been sleeping for many days. This guy finally woke up. Lu Yi's cheers came out. She flashed out of Hu Po's body and threw herself into Lu Ye's arms. She hugged his waist with both hands and buried her head in his chest. Her black hair spread out. Lu Ye's raised hand paused in midair. He had known Yi for so long. They were inseparable, but Yi rarely made intimate movements to him, let alone hugging him like this. Slowly lowering his big hand, Lu Yi gently embraced her petite body and gently patted her back. He was actually very afraid of falling into that state of silence. Although she had never told Lu Yi about it, Lu Yi could feel it. Once she fell into that state of silence, it was as if her entire being was wrapped in endless darkness. Even her thoughts became incomparably sluggish. In such an environment, the passage of time was already difficult to perceive. To her, it was like a nightmare that she would never wake up from. She was afraid that she would never wake up from this dream, never see the light again, never see the person she wanted to see again. "It's all right," Lu Yi comforted her softly. After a long time, Yi broke free from his arms, her face flushed red as she glanced over at Lu Yi and stomped her foot. "Don't laugh at me." "I didn't." Lu Yi said seriously, "How could I laugh at you?" Saying so, he raised his hand and pinched her cheek, trying to feel it. Smooth and delicate, not bad at all. Yi took a step back to escape from his demonic grasp, her cheeks puffed up in anger. "Has your cultivation increased?" Lu Yi asked. He thought for a moment and said, "It might be equivalent to the 5th order Cloud River realm." The increase in Yi's strength was directly linked to Hu Po's growth. The stronger Hu Po was, the stronger she would be. Previously, in Fox Immortal Valley, the strength of the spirit and tiger had greatly increased, allowing them to break through a minor realm. Now, with the monster core of an overlord grade monster beast, they had taken another step forward. This kind of cultivation was already on par with him. Checking Hoopa next to him, he found that this was indeed the case. The spirit and tiger were equivalent to the fifth order Cloud River realm. To be continued. Chapter 6:15. Hoopa's awakening and the increase in the strength of one spirit and one tiger were undoubtedly the only good news recently. Yi had the 9 front formation in her hands. The stronger she was, the more power she could unleash from the 9 front formation. For example, if Yi had been able to unleash more of the 9 front formation's power, Lu Yi might not have had to work so hard. On the other hand, Hoopa and Lu Yi had formed a life origin technique and a beast mark technique. In battle, Lu Yi could borrow strength from Hoopa, and once the beast transformation secret technique was activated, the stronger Hoopa was, the higher Lu Ye's limit would be. It could be said that Hoopa's increase in strength was equivalent to Lu Ye's increase in strength. These two companions were rare helpers by Lu Ye's side. In the entire cultivation world of the 9 provinces, they were unique. Recently, there were traces of cultivators outside the heavenly spirit land. Obviously, they were cultivators from the myriad Devil Ridge who had received the news and rushed here first. However, it was still early, so not many people came. It could be foreseen that as time passed, more and more cultivators would rush here. Although these cultivators had received news about Lu Yi, they didn't dare to act rashly before confirming it. They only secretly investigated the surroundings of the heavenly spirit land. Unfortunately, the heavenly spirit land was shrouded in a concealment array. No matter how they investigated, they couldn't find any clues. It wasn't until several days later that a cultivator finally couldn't bear it anymore. He flew straight to the sky above Heavenly Spirit Valley and raised his hand to cast a spell downward. As the spiritual power surged, the concealment array lost its effect. In an instant, the situation of the entire Heavenly Spirit Land was imprinted in everyone's eyes. There were several wooden houses scattered about, and a spirit spring was gurgling out of it. In front of one of the wooden houses, a person was casually sitting on the floor with a long saber beside his leg. His gaze was indifferent as he looked at the figure in the sky. For eyes met. The spell cultivator who cast the spell observed with rapt attention. He was overjoyed. Lu Yi. Although they had rushed here based on the news they had received, no one could be sure whether this was Lu Yi's hiding place unless they saw his whereabouts with their own eyes. At this moment, when the concealment array disappeared and Lu Yi's figure was truly revealed, the cultivators of the myriad Devil Ridge were all excited to see him, whether they were in the open or in the dark. The news was true. This was indeed where Lu Yi was hiding. Just as the spell cultivator was getting excited, more than 10 figures hiding in the dark flew over. Now that he had found Lu Yi's whereabouts, he naturally had to strike first to gain the advantage. There was only one Lu Yi, and whoever killed him would get the reward. However, not everyone charged out. Most of them chose to observe. In the spiritual land, Lu Yi raised his hand and pointed his palm at the magic cultivator hovering in the air. Faxiu was still immersed in the joy of discovering Lu Yi's whereabouts. When he saw Lu Yi's actions, he had no idea what Lu Yi was going to do. Just as he was puzzled, Lu Yi suddenly clenched his hand. It was as if he had imperceptibly grasped Faxiu's entire body in his palm. Then he waved his hand and said indifferently, "Get down here." The moment he finished speaking, the spell cultivator who was suspended in midair felt as if a huge mountain was pressing down on him. He was like a bird with broken wings, falling straight down in shock. The sudden turn of events caused him to panic. He cried out in alarm and madly urged his spiritual power to stabilize his body. However, at this moment, the clear sound of a sword rang out. Flying swords flew out from another wooden hut. Wrapped in an icy chi of death, they accurately attacked the magic cultivator who was dancing with joy. Thud thud thud. The spell cultivator's protective spiritual power lasted for less than a breath before it was broken. The flying swords pierced through, causing blood to spurt out. Miserable screams echoed endlessly in Huitian Valley. Plop! The spell cultivator fell to the ground but did not die immediately. His mouth and nose were full of blood, and many of his bones were broken. There were more than 10 flying swords piercing through his body. Before he could regain his senses, a shadow covered him. He opened his blurry eyes and saw that Wuxia, who had been sitting in front of the house, had unknowingly walked in front of him and was looking down at him. The spell cultivator was terrified. He instinctively wanted to urge his spiritual power, but Wuxia stepped on his chest. The heavy blow caused him to spit out blood, and the spiritual power he had painstakingly gathered dissipated. Wuxia raised his saber. The pitch-black mountain saber flashed with a sharp luster. "Wait!" the spell cultivator whispered. But before he could say anything, the saber had already stabbed down. The saber pierced through his chest and came out from his back, directly taking his life. The spell cultivator's body twitched a few times before he stopped breathing. Wuxia bent down and took the spell cultivator's storage bag. Then he kicked the corpse out of the spirit land. He shook off the blood on his mountain saber and coldly looked at the dozen figures floating in the distance. When they met his gaze, their scalps went numb. Although the spell cultivator who attacked just now had only used one technique from the spiritual power fluctuations around him, he was a ninth-order spell cultivator. A ninth-order spell cultivator was the limit of the Cloud River battlefield. He could be considered a master anywhere. However, such an expert had actually died here without knowing what had happened. From beginning to end, other than someone using their flying sword to help, Wuxia had only used one saber strike. Naturally, they didn't think that the ninth-order spell cultivator had died at Wuxia's hands. He had died so miserably because he had been too careless. Recalling what had happened to the spell cultivator, someone frowned and whispered, "A space sealing array." It didn't make sense for a ninth-order spell cultivator to suddenly fall down. There was no other explanation other than a space sealing array. They had long heard that Wuxia's attainments in the Tao of arrays were extremely high, but they didn't expect him to be so high that he could even arrange a space sealing array. The news they received didn't mention the existence of a space sealing array. When Tu Guanxiong spread the news, he didn't know whether it was intentional or not, but he omitted this information. The dozen or so 10,000 Demon's Ridge cultivators who had rushed over were now filled with joy. Fortunately, they weren't fast enough. Otherwise, once they entered the range of the space sealing array, they would have followed in the spell cultivator's footsteps. As for why Wuxia didn't wait for them to enter the range of the space sealing array before activating it, it was understandable. It wasn't that he didn't want to do so, but that he didn't dare. Using the opportunity created by the space sealing array, it wouldn't be difficult to kill a ninth-order spell cultivator, but if a dozen or so people were to break in, even if he could kill a few of them, the rest would be troublesome. The current situation was the best way to deal with it. Killing one person would deter the rest. The death of a ninth-order spell cultivator made the rest not dare to act rashly. Glancing at the dozen or so people indifferently, Wuxia raised his hand and the concealment array activated again. With a ripple, the entire spirit land disappeared from everyone's sight. The dozen or so people looked at each other for a while, then silently retreated. Although a ninth-order spell cultivator had died inexplicably, the news that Wuxia was hiding here had been confirmed. Moreover, some people saw the traces of Li Baxin and Feng Yuchan. The flying sword that had attacked the spell cultivator was controlled by Li Baxin. The news continued to spread, and the outside of Returning Sky Valley gradually became lively. Usually, there was no one here, but now, there was a hubbub of voices and traces of cultivators could be seen everywhere. Some cultivators who were familiar with each other gathered in groups of 3 or 5, discussing how to kill Wuxia safely and effectively to obtain the huge bounty. There were also masters who were arrogant and isolated, looking around coldly. The cultivators of the Holy Eve's spirit land returned under Mingzhi's lead, but they didn't gather together. Instead, they were divided into several teams and scattered around. Looking at the bustling entrance of Returning Sky Valley, Mingzhi sighed and let out a long breath. He was heartbroken that the Holy Eve's spirit land had suffered too many losses before, and even his senior brother Huoliao Yuan had died at the hands of Wuxia. But now, more than 300 cultivators had gathered from all over the Myriad Demon's Ridge, and those who dared to come here were all 6th-order cultivators and above. With such a force, even if they just pushed their way through, Lu Ye would definitely not be able to resist. He would definitely die. As such, senior brother Hua could rest in peace. Looking in the direction of returning Sky Valley, Mingzhe's eyes were filled with joy, as if he was about to get his revenge. However, the development of the situation was somewhat different from what he had expected. More and more myriad demons ridge cultivators gathered here, and there were even many Ninth Order masters from first-grade sects and first-grade sects, but no one attacked returning Sky Valley. Everyone seemed to have secretly reached a tacit understanding, and they were all watching. Mingzhe gradually came to his senses. The Holy Eve's spiritual land no longer had any hopes of obtaining the bounty on Lu Ye's head. They only wanted to kill with a borrowed knife and avenge their dead brothers. However, the cultivators who had rushed over for the sake of profit were different. Every one of them had their eyes on the huge bounty. After learning that returning Sky Valley was shrouded in a space-restricting array, no one dared to act rashly. Lu Ye could even arrange a space-restricting array, so who knew what other strange spirit arrays he had in his spirit land? At this time, whoever stood out would be unlucky. To put it simply, everyone's hearts were not united. They all hoped that others would make the first move to test the heritage of returning Sky Valley, so that they could secretly pick up the scraps. Mingzhe was angry at first. They clearly had the power to flatten everything, but they schemed against each other, which was really disappointing. But on second thought, he could understand the mentality of these masters. After all, they did not have that much hatred with Lu Ye. Moreover, the bounty on Lu Ye's head was so huge that they had to be careful in order to increase their success rate. But if this continued, how could they kill Lu Ye? Mingzhe's worries were obviously unnecessary. How could others not think of what he could think of? Just as he was worrying about gains and losses, a figure suddenly stood up and flew into the air, immediately attracting everyone's attention. Chapter 616. The one who stood out was a man who looked to be in his 20s, but the spirit energy fluctuations on his body were already at the level of a Cloud River Realm 9th Order. Being able to have such a cultivation at such a young age undoubtedly meant that his background and aptitude were extremely good. The man was handsome and had an extraordinary temperament. What was rare was that he didn't have the slightest bit of arrogance and aloofness of someone from a big sect. Instead, his face easily gave people a kind of amiable feeling. The faint smile on his face made people feel like they were bathing in a spring breeze. He flew into the air and hovered about 10 feet above the ground. Seeing that he had attracted the attention of the nearby cultivators, he spoke in a gentle tone. "Fellow cultivators from all over the 9 states, Song Jue greets you." As he said this, he turned in a circle with his hands clasped in front of him, looking very polite. Immediately, a soft whisper came from somewhere in the crowd. "It's Song Jue from Abyss Rainbow Hall." In the cultivation world of the 9 states, there were new talents in every generation, and the new generation replaced the old. There were so many cultivators present. Some might not know who Song Jue was, but everyone knew about Abyss Rainbow Hall. After all, it was a first-grade sect. When Lu Yi had just stepped into the cultivation world, a woman had told him that the top 10 first-grade sects of the War Province were divided into 1 palace, 2 temples, 3 sects, and 4 sects. Abyss Rainbow Hall was one of the 2 temples. As a disciple of Abyss Rainbow Hall who was active in the Cloud River battlefield, Song Jue was actually quite famous, but after all, not everyone knew him. However, it didn't matter whether they knew him or not. He was a Cloud River Realm 9th Order and a disciple of Abyss Rainbow Hall. These 2 identities were enough. With a warm smile still on his face, Song Jue opened his mouth and said, "Fellow Taoists, you have all rushed here from all over the battlefield. This Song Jue won't go into detail as everyone is well aware of the reason. This Song Jue is fortunate enough to stand here today and only wishes to say a few words of criticism." The smile on his face slowly disappeared, and he became serious. Since ancient times, in the spiritual stream battlefield, the Yunhe battlefield, and even the cultivation world of the 9 states, the Wanmo Ridge and the Haotian Alliance have been fighting against each other. It's understandable that the cultivators each have their own standpoints. For so many years, the blood feud between them has been like the east wind suppressing the west wind, and the west wind suppressing the east wind. There has never been a clear winner. But ever since Lu Ye appeared in the Jade Blood sect, the situation seemed to have changed subtly. In the Spirit Stream battlefield, many fellow Taoists from the Myriad Devil Ridge died because of him. Many sects suffered heavy losses because of him, especially the Inner Circle and the Core Circle. I heard that dozens of sects in the Inner Circle were destroyed by him. I didn't dare to believe it, but it happened. Then there's the Core Circle. The sects stationed in the Core Circle are all grade 3 and above. Each sect has a large number of talents. In the past, it might not be possible to destroy a single grade 3 sect's encampment in several years. However, since Lu Ye stepped into the Core Circle, he has destroyed dozens of Core Circle encampments. Twice in a row, the Core Circle sects were forced to pay up to avoid disaster. At this point, Song Jue's face was filled with grief and indignation, and his expression became agitated. To tell you the truth, this song comes from Abyss Rainbow Hall. Perhaps many of the fellow Taoists present here belong to one of them. This is a disgrace to us, a disgrace to the entire Myriad Devil Ridge camp. The large sects in the Core Circle had been extorted by Lu Ye twice and were forced to pay him for their safety. Although this was not a secret, few Myriad Devil Ridge cultivators spoke of it in public. They couldn't afford to lose face. But today, Song Jue spoke of this matter unscrupulously, and the effect was surprisingly good. Many people in the crowd listened with gloomy expressions. Cultivators were sect cultivators, and sects were the face of cultivators. How could cultivators remain indifferent when their sects were humiliated? It could be said that some of the Myriad Devil Ridge cultivators gathered here were here for the bounty on Lu Ye's head, but more were driven by hatred. We are all indebted to our sects and have been carefully taught and cultivated by our elders to achieve what we have today. When our junior brothers and sisters were bullied, we were not there. When our sects were humiliated, we were not there. When our sects were forced to compromise, we were still not there. Song Jue's voice gradually became louder, and the warm smile on his face had long been replaced by a resonant anger. He waved his hand and shouted in a low voice, "We can't interfere in the matters of the Spirit Stream battlefield. But this is the Cloud River battlefield, and Lu Ye is here." He suddenly pointed in the direction of Huitian Valley. "He's there. He's looking at us from there and laughing at us. He's laughing at us for scheming against each other even though we have the numbers. He's laughing at us for not taking the initiative to step forward despite having the power to flatten everything. He's laughing at us for being a plate of loose sand." In the crowd below, Mingzhi's blood was boiling as he listened. He clenched his fists and wished he could cheer loudly. Song Jue's words had spoken to the bottom of his heart. He suddenly realized that it was not that there were no sensible people in Myriad Devil Ridge. On the contrary, many people were clear in their hearts. They just lacked a leader. Now that Song Jue had stepped forward and become the leader, there was hope that the cultivators of Myriad Devil Ridge could unite as one. That was a rope of hatred that could whip the entire Huitian Valley and Lu Ye into pieces. Song Jue let out a long breath, and his high-pitched voice calmed down. He said slowly, "Fellow Taoists, I know that Lu Ye has a huge bounty on his head. Even if anyone only has 10% or even 5% of this bounty, it's enough to enjoy for a lifetime. But there's only one Lu Ye, and so many of us have come this time. As the saying goes, we don't worry about scarcity, but we worry about uneven distribution. I understand the worries in many of your hearts, but what I want to say is, are we just going to watch and be on guard against each other, and let Lu Ye laugh at us from inside? If that's the case, then what future will Myriad Devil Ridge have in the future?" Someone immediately said, "Senior Brother Song, since you've stepped forward, how about you take command of the operation? We'll all listen to your orders, and I think the other fellow Taoists won't be unwilling." Yes, Senior Brother Song will take command. We'll listen to Senior Brother Song's orders. Voices of agreement could be heard from all over the crowd. Song Jue's face was brimming with a smile again, and he cupped his fists again. "Thank you for your support. Since I've taken the initiative to step forward, I also have this intention. After all, we can't just wait like this forever. Of course, if any of you feel that it's inappropriate, you can speak frankly. I'm not a narrow-minded person. The atmosphere had been set to such an extent that no one dared to stand up and refute Song Jue. At this time, standing up and refuting Song Jue would only cause public anger. Moreover, Song Jue's cultivation and background were all there. Even if there were people whose cultivation was not inferior to his, it was impossible for them to embarrass him at this time. He raised his hand slightly and pressed it twice, and the noise gradually subsided. Song Jue continued, "Lu Ye is going to die, and this spiritual land is going to be destroyed. However, I'm not doing this for the bounty, but to eradicate a disaster for the myriad demons rich. I've specially studied Lu Ye. Although his cultivation is still low, he has done many things that no one has been able to do since ancient times. When he was at the Spirit Stream battlefield, he stirred up the entire battlefield. Now that he's at the Cloud River battlefield, although he hasn't done anything too shocking, it can be seen from the hunting ground that if he doesn't die, he will definitely become a huge problem for the myriad demons ridge in the future. I think your sects don't want to see him grow, or else they wouldn't have issued so many bounties. Also, according to the various information I've obtained, Lu Ye has set up many formations in this spiritual land, especially the Forbidden Sky formation. A fellow Taoist lost his life because of it a few days ago. In addition, there are nearly 300 demon wolves in this spiritual land, and they can't be underestimated. Of course, with so many of us, we already have enough power to crush them. However, I want to remind everyone that you must still be careful. Although the bounty is good, you still need to be alive to enjoy it. As for the bounty after killing Lu Ye, I'll calculate it in advance. All the fellow Taoists who participate in this matter will share Lu Ye's bounty equally. Of course, I need someone to help me. If there's a clever junior sister who's willing to help me, you can come and find me. As soon as he said this, many people were shocked. They really didn't expect Song Jue to make such a decision. Lu Ye's bounty was indeed huge, but if it was divided equally among so many people present, it was nothing. At most, it could be considered a windfall. It was better than nothing. Moreover, Song Jue was right. The main purpose of killing Lu Ye this time was not for the bounty, but to eradicate a disaster for the myriad demons ridge. The bounty was secondary. Moreover, with so many people acting together, there was basically no risk. The bounty was given for free. At the entrance of Huitian Valley, the scattered cultivators of the myriad demons ridge gathered their hearts because of Song Jue's words. Although some of them were unwilling, it was difficult for them to resist the general trend. Song Jue said a few more words, but it was nothing more than exhorting the cultivators of the myriad demons ridge to pay attention to protect themselves. This made everyone feel that he was a good person. After Song Jue landed, a few female cultivators took the initiative to find him. With Song Jue's arrangement, the female cultivators excitedly began to count the names, backgrounds, and even sex of the cultivators who participated in the attack on Huitian Valley. Although there were many cultivators of the myriad demons ridge, the efficiency of the female cultivators was very high. In less than an hour, a few jade slips appeared in front of Song Jue. He smiled warmly at the female cultivators. "Junior sisters, you've worked hard." The female cultivators had different reactions. Some smiled, some were shy and silent, and some took the initiative to exchange battlefield imprints with Song Jue. Song Jue naturally agreed. After dealing with the female cultivators, Song Jue checked the contents of the jade slips. A voice suddenly sounded beside him. "Don't you feel guilty for doing this?" There was only the voice and no figure. Even if someone passed by Song Jue, he didn't notice anything. Song Jue lowered his head and his mouth moved slightly. "You're definitely not the only ghost cultivator hiding. You'd better not let others succeed. In Wuji, I joined forces with you because I trusted you. I also tried my best to encourage this group of people. Don't let me down." Chapter 617. If the cultivators of the Cloud River battlefield were to be ranked on a list, Lu Yi would definitely be at the top of the list. As early as in the Spirit Stream battlefield, his actions had even attracted the attention of many Spirit Sea realm cultivators. The huge bounty issued by the major sects of the Myriad Devil Mountain range made most of the cultivators in 9 regions have heard of Lu Ye's name. After Lu Yi, there were Li Baxian and Feng Yuchan. Perhaps in the entire cultivation world of the 9 states, their fame was not too outstanding, but in the Cloud River battlefield, they were still very famous. After all, which of these Cloud River realm cultivators had not come from the Spirit Stream realm? Which one of them had not looked up to these 2 malignant tumors of the Spirit Stream battlefield? Below them were cultivators like Song Jue, who had a good background, a good cultivation, and a little fame. Yingwu Ji could also be considered in this level. Although very few people had seen his true face, many people had heard of his name, especially the cultivators of the 10,000 Demon Ridge, and especially the ghost cultivators, because just 2 months ago, Yingwu Ji used his Cloud River 9th Order cultivation to kill a true Lake Realm cultivator in the War Province's chaotic sky plains. Killing a true Lake Realm cultivator in the Cloud River battlefield was a magnificent feat. Although the true Lake Realm cultivator had been injured, when the news spread, it was still shocking. This was no longer a matter of killing an enemy above one's realm, but killing an enemy above one's realm. Looking at the history of the 9 states, there were countless cultivators who could kill an enemy above their realm, but there were very few who could do so. The main reason Yingwu Ji could do this was because he was a ghost cultivator. Moreover, he was a ghost cultivator from the Sin Luo Temple. The War Province had 10 first-grade sects, 1 palace, 2 temples, 3 sects, and 4 sections. One of the 2 temples was the Yuan Hong Temple that Song Jue came from, and the other was the Sin Luo Temple that Yingwu Ji came from. The Sin Luo Temple was a very special sect. 70 to 80% of the cultivators in the sect were ghost cultivators. It was also the most difficult sect to deal with in the 9 states. For example, the North Profound Sword sect and the Wild Saber sect only cultivated in one field generation after generation to reach the peak. These 2 sects were indeed powerful, but their strength was on the surface. But Sin Luo Hall was different. No one knew what kind of resources Sin Luo Hall had because the ghost cultivators were all hiding in the dark. There was a saying in the cultivation world that if a cultivator provoked another first-rank sect, they might still have a chance of survival. However, if they were targeted by the Sin Luo Temple, then they would have no chance of survival. Song Jue and Yingwu Ji were both cultivators from the military province and from the Myriad Demons Ridge. They were of similar age and cultivation base. Naturally, Song Jue and Yingwu Ji had contacted each other privately. He stood up and spoke so vehemently. On the surface, he seemed to be righteous and selfless, but in fact, he was just trying to encourage the cultivators from the Myriad Devil Ridge. After all, according to the information he received, the defense of Lu Ye's spiritual land was still very strong. Only by reorganizing the forces of the Myriad Devil Ridge would they have a chance to break through the defense of Lu Ye's spiritual land. When the time came, he would lead the Myriad Demon Ridge cultivators to attack. On the surface, he would attract Lu Ye's attention while Yingwu Ji hid in the shadows, waiting for an opportunity to strike. After killing Lu Yi, he would split the bounty with Yingwu Ji. The entire plan would be done in secret and the chances of success were extremely high. "I'll do it, don't worry." Yingwu Ji's voice drifted over, "But I want 60%. Song Jue indifferently said, "Give me a reason. I'll bear the infamy." If he really did steal Lu Ye's head under the noses of so many Myriad Demons Ridge cultivators, he would definitely incur their wrath. Moreover, this kind of thing couldn't be concealed at all. When the time came to collect the bounty from the various sects, it would be obvious who killed Lu Yi. The Myriad Demons Ridge cultivators who had their heads stolen might not dare to offend Yingwu Ji, but they could still curse him in private. This was something that was bound to happen. You're just a ghost cultivator who hides his head and shows his tail, yet you're still afraid of being cursed? Words are like knives to the heart. If too many people curse me, I'll be very sad. I don't care, I want 60%. You'll be stuffed to death. Song Jue snapped, "As you wish." 50 to 60% wasn't much of a difference, so Song Jue didn't bother to dwell on this issue. Then hurry up and act, I can't wait any longer, Ingwuji urged. A moment later, the myriad demons' ridge cultivators moved quickly and effectively under Song Jue's command. Hundreds of cultivators moved in groups. The strong body cultivators stood at the front, behind them were the murderous weapon cultivators, and behind them were the ghost cultivators and dharma cultivators. Under Song Jue's arrangement, the group of cultivators was divided into 9 groups, forming an arrow formation and majestically moving toward the heavenly spirit land. In the heavenly spirit land, Li Baxian, Feng Yuechen, and Giant Armor stood beside Lu Yi, looking up in the direction of the valley entrance with solemn expressions. With such a lineup from the myriad demons' ridge, their side absolutely couldn't resist. Not to mention that the wolf pack had been driven out. Even if the wolf pack stayed behind, it was impossible to defeat the other side. In the end, they still had to escape back to the 9 regions. But what made Li Baxian feel strange was that his junior brother didn't seem to have the intention to immediately escape back to the 9 regions. He still stood there quietly. He didn't know what Lu Ye's plan was, but he knew that his junior brother was no longer the junior brother who needed his protection when they first met. After several years of growth, his junior brother had become independent. The myriad demons' ridge cultivators pressed toward the heavenly spirit land bit by bit. Song Jue's shout spread in all directions, "Fellow Taoists, be careful. Don't step into the range of the other party's heavenly spirit land. I'll repeat again, there's a forbidden space formation in the heavenly spirit land. Later, we'll attack together and break the protective formation here. Then listen to my command." Song Jue's previous efforts were still very effective. Excluding some ghost cultivators who were hiding in the dark, the cultivators on the surface were very respectful at this moment. After all, they couldn't take the reward for killing Lu Yi alone. Naturally, there was no need to take the risk. It was safer to move together with the group. Of the 9 groups of people, Song Jue personally led one group and flew at the front. When they were about the right distance, Song Jue raised his hand and all the cultivators stopped. He raised his hand and shot out a imperial equipment. The imperial equipment's flowing light seemed to penetrate a layer of invisible boundary. As ripples spread, the concealment formation's effect was broken. The situation in the heavenly spirit land was imprinted in everyone's vision. A few wooden houses were scattered, and a spirit spring was very conspicuous. In front of one of the wooden houses, 4 figures stood. Although the figure standing at the back was unusually tall and sturdy, Song Jue's gaze was immediately attracted to Lu Yi, who was standing in front. He frowned slightly, and a trace of surprise flashed across his face. The situation was a little different from what he had imagined. At the same time, the myriad demons' ridge cultivators also discovered that the heavenly spirit land in front of them had no protective formation, or rather, the protective formation had not been activated. The entire heavenly spirit land appeared in their vision without any protection. Moreover, they didn't see any traces of the rumored hundreds of demon wolves. What did this mean? Song Jue's gaze swept across the heavenly spirit land. He didn't see any traces of demon wolves, but that didn't mean there weren't any. Since Lu Ye could arrange a concealment formation to hide the entire heavenly spirit land, hiding a few demon wolves naturally wouldn't be a problem. Song Jue was sure that if they dared to set foot in the heavenly spirit land, those hidden demon wolves would attack from all directions. He had seen through this little trick at a glance. It was like showing off one's slight skill in front of an expert. However, although the situation was unexpected, it made it easier for Ingwuji to act in secret. Originally, he and Ingwuji's plan was for him to lead people to break through the protective formation of the heavenly spirit land. Then, Ingwuji would take the opportunity to sneak in and kill Lu Ye. Now that the other party hadn't even activated the protective formation, wouldn't Ingwuji be able to enter unhindered? Many thoughts flashed through his mind. Song Jue's signature warm smile appeared on his face. He looked at Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan behind Lu Yi and slowly said, "Fellow Taoist Li, fellow Taoist Feng, after so many years, you're still as elegant as ever." When Song Jue was at the Spirit Stream battlefield, he was ranked 3rd on the Spirit Stream list. This was the highest ranking a cultivator could achieve during the reign of the Heavenly Spirit Stream list's 3 malignant tumors. The first was Feng Yuechan, and the second was Yan Xing. No matter which one it was, none of the cultivators who came later could contend against them. As experts on the Heavenly Spirit Stream list, Song Jue, Li Baxin, and Feng Yuechan naturally knew each other. Li Baxin ignored him. Since they were in different camps, there was no need to be polite. She only whispered to Lu Yi, "Song Jue from the Deep Rainbow Hall is very strong. At the very least, he's on the same level as Xiao Yang. Don't be fooled by his sunny appearance. He's actually very scheming." Lu Yi nodded slightly. He knew how strong Xiao Yang was. For this guy to be on the same level as Xiao Yang, he was obviously very strong. The Deep Rainbow Hall. Lu Yi suddenly remembered. Wasn't that the rank 1 Heavenly Spirit Stream in the War Province? As for Li Baxin's evaluation of Song Jue, it was undoubtedly that this guy was two-faced. However, it didn't matter. Lu Yi didn't need to play any tricks with them. Today's confrontation was an open and above-board scheme. Since Li Baxin and Feng Yuechan ignored him, Song Jue didn't mind. He looked at Lu Yi and said, "Fellow Taoist Lu from the Jade Blood Sect, I've heard a lot about you. Song Jue greets you." Saying so, he politely bowed to Lu Yi. Lu Yi casually cupped his hands. "Fellow Taoist Song has come from afar. Why don't you come in for a chat? If word of you standing outside and talking to me were to spread, I'm afraid that cultivators from the Jade Blood Sect would think that we don't know how to treat our guests." Song Jue laughed. "Fellow Taoist Lu must be joking. There's no need to go in for a chat. I've long heard that fellow Taoist Lu has extremely high attainments in the Tao of arrays. This Song doesn't want to fall into some kind of array." Although he was smiling on the surface, he coldly snorted in his heart. He was even more certain that there was some kind of earth-shattering array hidden in Lu Ye's spiritual land. As soon as they stepped in, it would activate and catch them off guard. How could that be? Lu Ye's expression was as calm as water. "Everyone who comes is a guest. I can't wait to welcome you. Why would I set up some heavenly net earth fiend array, shocking feather flying heaven array, or Sumeru formless sword array to deal with you? Heavenly net earth fiend array, shocking feather flying heaven array, Sumeru formless sword array. What kind of array were these?" The group of myriad demon ridge cultivators' eyelids twitched. When they looked at the spiritual land again, they only felt that it was full of danger and hidden killing intent. To be continued. Chapter 6:18. Song Jue laughed heartily. "Seeing is believing. Fellow cultivator Lu is really interesting." Born in Abyss Rainbow Hall, he was well-read. Although he didn't cultivate array Tao, he more or less knew some basic things about array Tao. The few names that Lu Yi casually mentioned were all earth-shattering arrays. They were definitely not something that a Cloud River Realm cultivator could arrange. It was impossible for there to be such arrays in the spirit land in front of them. But whether there were other arrays, it was unknown. The other party had put on such an attitude of inviting them into a trap. Obviously, he had nothing to fear. "Is it interesting?" Lu Yi lowered his eyes. "Then let me show you something more interesting." As he spoke, an array flag suddenly appeared in his hand and he waved it gently. There was a loud bang, followed by flames soaring into the sky. Somewhere in the spirit land, along with the violent surge of spirit chi, a hidden figure suddenly appeared and was enveloped by the flames. He screamed miserably and quickly retreated. It was a ghost cultivator who was trying to sneak into the spirit land. This ghost cultivator was only a 6th order ghost cultivator, so it was unknown where he got the courage to do such a thing. At this moment, he was enveloped by the explosion array and his entire body was covered in flames. It was not easy for him to get out of the range of the explosion array, but he directly fell to the ground, gasping for breath. This sudden change shocked the group of myriad demon ridge cultivators. They all lowered their heads and looked at the ghost cultivator who had fallen to the ground. Before they could react, Lu Yi waved the array flag in his hand. Violent noises continuously rang out from various parts of the spiritual land. Streaks of fiery light rose and fell one after another. Every sound that rang out was accompanied by a cry of surprise or a scream of agony. Within every explosion array, there was the figure of a ghost cultivator. In a short time, more than a dozen explosion arrays were activated. More than a dozen ghost cultivators hiding in the dark were exposed. They were either killed or injured. The group of myriad Demon Ridge cultivators were dumbfounded. Although they knew that there would be ghost cultivators hiding in the dark, they didn't expect there to be so many of them. And this was just the exposed ones. What about those that weren't? This group of ghost cultivators were really incapable of doing anything right. What made them even more shocked was how many arrays Lu Ye had set up in the spirit land. Those ghost cultivators were scattered all over the spiritual land, but they still could not avoid the fate of being injured by the formation. Within this spiritual land, every step was filled with traps. In the sky, Song Jue frowned as he sized up the ghostly cultivators that had revealed themselves. Although he knew that with Endless Shadow's ability, he wouldn't be exposed so easily, he was still a little worried. He swept his gaze over the dozen ghostly cultivators and didn't find any trace of Endless Shadow. Only then did he relax a little. Somewhere in the spiritual land, Wuxia was hiding in the shadows, slowly approaching Lu Ye's location. He was silent, not retreating even when his dozen or so companions were exposed. As an outstanding ghost cultivator, he naturally had some knowledge of the way of formations, especially the way of breaking formations. This was because there were many times when ghost cultivators needed to sneak into some formations to kill their targets. There was a saying in the cultivation world of the 9 prefectures that a ghost cultivator who did not understand the Tao of arrays was not a qualified ghost cultivator. In the Spirit Stream tier and Cloud River tier, ghost cultivators didn't have high requirements for the Tao of formations. However, as their cultivation level increased, ghost cultivators also had higher requirements for the Tao of formations. This led to a bizarre phenomenon in the cultivation world of the 9 prefectures. Some people appeared to be array masters on the surface, but were actually ghost cultivators who were proficient in concealment and assassination. In terms of attainments in the Tao of formations, Wuxia was inferior to Lu Ye, but he was different from those stupid ghost cultivators. He could more or less see some traces of formations, so along the way, he didn't touch any formations at all. He didn't even step into the range of a formation. Is it beautiful? Lu Ye put down the formation flag in his hand. Song Jue took a deep breath and praised, "I've long heard that fellow Taoist Lu has extremely high attainments in the Tao of formations. Now that I've seen it, it's really extraordinary. This song admires you." He had easily forced out the traces of more than a dozen ghostly cultivators. Under such a deterrent, the other ghost cultivators hiding in the dark wouldn't dare to act rashly. So, if he wanted to succeed, he would have to rely on Wuxia. Although the current situation was unexpected, it was what Song Jue wanted to see. He didn't need to do too much. He only needed to attract Lu Ye's attention here and create an opportunity for Wuxia to make a move. Once Wuxia made a move, Lu Ye would die without a doubt and the purpose of this trip would be achieved. Thinking of this, he slowly shook his head. "But fellow Taoist Lu, forgive me for saying too much, but this is meaningless. Today, hundreds of fellow Taoists from my myriad Devil Ridge have gathered here. I'm sure fellow Taoist Lu also understands why. Under such circumstances, does fellow Taoist Lu think you still have a chance of survival? It looks like I'm dead for sure?" Song Jue said, "Does fellow Taoist Lu still have some unrealistic fantasies?" Naturally, even ants want to live, let alone cultivators like us. It's reasonable that fellow Taoist Lu doesn't want to accept his fate, but is fellow Taoist Lu willing to implicate others because of his own matters? Lu Ye narrowed his eyes slightly. Song Jue continued, "No matter how many formations fellow Taoist Lu has laid down in this spiritual land, since the cultivators of my myriad Devil Ridge have come here today, they won't return empty-handed. But if we force it, I'm afraid both of us will suffer losses. The biggest possibility is that we will pay a certain price and your side will be completely wiped out." He raised his eyebrows. "Fellow Taoist Lu, how about I make a deal with you?" The corners of Lu Ye's mouth suddenly curled up, revealing a trace of a smile. "What a coincidence, I also want to make a deal with you." Song Jue was surprised. "Oh? What kind of deal does fellow Taoist Lu want to make? Why don't you tell me?" "Tell me yours first." Song Jue didn't beat around the bush and said bluntly, "As I said just now, if there is a conflict, both of us will have to pay the price. How about fellow Taoist Lu just surrender?" "Are you still asleep?" Song Jue said, "As long as fellow Taoist Lu is willing to surrender, I can make the decision to let the 3 companions behind you leave this place safely. If fellow Taoist Lu doesn't trust me, I can make a heavenly oath." "So that's how it is." Lu Yi understood what he meant, a very sincere proposal. Using himself to ensure the safety of Li Baxian and the others, if Lu Yi really didn't have any backup plans, this was indeed a proposal worth considering. Of course, Li Baxian and the others definitely wouldn't agree. Then what does fellow Taoist Lu think? Lu Yi just opened his mouth when he suddenly turned his head to look to the side. The spiritual runes of insight instantly strengthened his eyes. Then he quickly raised the array flag in his hand and waved it down. He had done this before, which resulted in the explosion of more than 10 ghost cultivators. Now that he suddenly did this again, it was obvious that he had discovered traces of ghost cultivators. But this time, the hidden ghost cultivators were only 10 feet away from his position. This was already an extremely dangerous distance, and the only ghost cultivator who could sneak in to this extent under the previous deterrence was only Ying Wuji. When Lu Yi looked over, Ying Wuji's heart was filled with surprise. He instinctively felt that he had not been exposed, but Lu Ye's gaze was fixed on his position, so it was obvious that he had sensed something. How was this possible? 2 months ago, even that true lake-stage cultivator didn't sense his approach. How could this Lu Ye detect him? He also didn't trigger any traces of spirit arrays, or was this guy's soul even stronger than the dead true lake-stage cultivator? In that instant, Ying Wuji reacted, his whole body turning into a black shadow as he rushed towards Lu Yi at an extremely fast speed. Although he wanted to sneak up to Lu Yi and kill him in one strike, since he had been exposed, he could only attack head-on. With a distance of 10 feet, it was impossible for a 9th-order cultivator to dodge. Lu Yi didn't dodge, he just waved the array flag in his hand. In the next instant, a curtain of light that covered an area of several meters appeared out of thin air, completely enveloping Ying Wuji. Ying Wuji's heart thumped. The moment he saw this light curtain, he realized that something was wrong, because this light curtain gave him the feeling that it was an entrapment array. The next moment, his whole body was wrapped in a fierce aura as he slammed into the light curtain. Unsurprisingly, it was indeed an entrapment array, and even with his full strength as a 9th-order ghost cultivator, he was unable to break through it. A sense of horror flooded his body and mind, and inside the entrapment array, violent and chaotic spirit chi fluctuations surged as a bright burst of fire appeared in Ying Wuji's vision. Hong 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 hong. The explosion array erupted with power, and it wasn't just a single array. Just by looking at the movement, it was obvious there were at least 3 or 4 explosion arrays superimposed. And inside the entrapment array, the power of the explosion array was further amplified. Outside the spirit land, the eyes of many myriad demon ridge cultivators twitched. This was painful to watch. Amidst the flames, a muffled groan rang out. The light curtain of the entrapment array only lasted a breath of time before it broke. It wasn't that the entrapment array arranged by Lu Yi wasn't strong enough, but rather that even a powerful ghost cultivator like Ying Wuji couldn't break through it. It was just that the superimposed power of several explosion arrays had exceeded the limits of the entrapment array's light curtain. Almost at the moment the entrapment array's light curtain broke, a black shadow rushed out, but instead of rushing in Lu Ye's direction, it went in the opposite direction. The speed was far faster than before, and the surface of the black shadow was even covered in a thick layer of blood-red light. It was unknown what kind of secret technique it had used. The black shadow flashed and rushed out of returning Heaven Valley in the blink of an eye, disappearing without a trace. From beginning to end, no one saw his true appearance. Only Lu Yi vaguely saw something the moment the other party's figure was exposed. However, the other party was wearing a black cat mask on his face, so Lu Yi couldn't see his appearance. He could only infer from the spirit energy fluctuations that this person was a ninth-order ghost cultivator. In the sky, Song Jue watched this scene speechlessly. In Wuji failed. Not only did he fail, but he was also seriously injured. This was truly the biggest joke in the world. To be continued, that you're tuning in to the Han Li's Immortal Journey YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.